I've been a ranger for about 2 years now, and overall I like it. The hours are long, and the pay isn't great, but it feels good to help my community and just live with nature and peace. Even so, I will never forget how I started with the park service and the hellish process that brought me to this point. When I started, there were five of us hoping for a spot on the service. Bruce, Claire, Miguel, Laura, me. The deal was simple. 3 months on fire watch, and you become a full-fledged park ranger. I just dropped out of college when I signed up to the service. My scholarship and my grant prospects were ruined by a professor who's a known hard-ass. The guy had a 65% fail rate among students. His class was also required for my field of study. After 3 attempts, the college took away my grant, and the scholarship program pulled their backing. I was left with no job, very little money, and pissed off parents who couldn't understand how I could fail a class that was so important. Well, I needed a job and I needed it quickly. But the ad for this one should have been a red flag from the get-go. I still remember what it said. Wanted. Individuals looking for immediate hiring, offering full-time employment after a 3-month probationary period with the forestry department. Must be willing to live in the park during the probation period. Serious applicants only. Now, all I really read was the bit about full-time employment and living in the park. My parents' house wasn't really cutting it, so I called the number on the ad and I learned that they only had one spot left. They said they'd be happy to set up an interview for the very next day. So the next morning, I was waiting outside Ranger Keller's office at 8 a.m. sharp in my best polo and khaki slacks. Ranger Keller pulled up about 5 minutes after 8 and smiled when he saw me. He's a big guy, easily 6 feet 5 inches. He had a thick mustache and a shaved head that he keeps under a wide-brimmed hat. I remember being a little nervous as I sat there, and he looked through my resume. "So, you want to be a park ranger, right?" he started. I shrugged. "I guess. The work seems interesting, and I gotta do something." He nodded, looking at my lackluster application. "Okay, well, do you know anything about the program we're running? You lock some of us in the fire tower for 3 months and see if we crack by the sound of it?" He laughed at that, but it never reached his eyes. Something like that. "Hey, you spent a lot of time in the woods. Do you know your way around a campfire or a forest trail?" I told him I'd been in the Scouts since I was 6 years old. I'd gone camping with my friends since middle school, and I've often hiked the Appalachian Trail since high school. In reality, my friends and I would just drag our crap out into the woods and get drunk on the trails. We used these camping trips just to hang out, we were generally up to no good. It was a wonder that we hadn't set a campsite on fire yet, but at least it had given me some working knowledge on how to act on the trail. I knew enough to hang our stuff in anti-bear bags, dig our latrines outside of camp, make sure our fires wouldn't rekindle afterward, and the other stuff the Boy Scouts taught me. Now, surprisingly, Ranger Keller at least seemed somewhat impressed by what I told him. He told me to report back here in a week to start my assignment. A week later, I had a bag packed and I was pulling into the parking lot. There were 4 other cars there now. A small group of people around my age were hanging out on my porch. These would be my housemates for the next 90 days, and I figured I should get acquainted. They looked up as I walked towards the porch. A big blonde guy who looked like a linebacker came up to shake my hand. That was Bruce, who would eventually become our de facto leader. When I shook his hand, he had the good grace not to crush my fingers. He gave me a smile that looked like he'd never seen the dentist, and he offered to introduce me to the others. Miguel was tall and lean, with his hair buzzed low. He nodded as Bruce made introductions, putting his cigarette in his mouth so he could shake my hand. Laura smiled and waved as she sat in one of the uncomfortable metal chairs they had out there. She was small, 5'2" maybe, and her black hair was long and shiny. I remember wondering if she had a boyfriend, but I supposed I would find out. Claire was as blonde as Bruce, but less friendly. She offered a limp hand for me to shake and snatched it back just as quickly. Maybe she'd warm up with time, I thought. Ranger Keller came out a few minutes later. He passed out our uniforms, then pointed to a beat-up truck beside the cabin. "All right, climbing kids, let's go check out your digs for the next year." The uniforms turned out to be just khaki-colored shirts that said trainee on the back of them. Bruce, Miguel, and I rode in the bed of the truck while the girls rode with Keller in the cab. As we rolled along, we talked about what we could expect in the coming year. The others seemed to think it wouldn't be difficult. Miguel was an experienced hiker and had seen more of the Appalachian Trail than anyone I knew. Bruce's dad was a park ranger in the Midwest, and he'd grown up on the trails. The two seemed very confident that a year of fire watch would be nothing. You know, I heard they keep your pay held in trust while you do this, and if you quit, you don't get anything, Bruce said. Can you imagine getting 3 months of pay all at once in a job? I also heard the last bunch didn't finish. They never got the money. Bruce's eyes flicked to the cab as he said this. What? I asked. Like they got fired or something. Not like the Rangers went to drop off some supplies one morning, and the trainees were just all gone, he replied. Miguel looked a little confused, but I just laughed. Are you a writer in your spare time? I began. Sounds like a good story, I'll give you that. Bruce, however, never even cracked a smile. I don't put a lot of stock in stories, I said, but it's something interesting to think about. We're 20 to 30 miles from the closest station. I mean, anything could happen out here. The fire tower soon came into view as we kicked up dust along the dirt road. It was huge, rising above the trees like a metal exclamation point. The closer we got, the larger it seemed to rise. It had to be tall, after all, so you could see fires from miles away. We'd be living here for the next 3 months, but being up that high, it'd probably take some getting used to. As we pulled into the gravel driveway, I saw a 2-story house built into the bottom of the tower. It looked very out of place sitting beneath a tower of steel. All right, this is it, Keller said. Welcome to the valley, your home for the next 90 days. The front door opened onto a mudroom and a raised living area. It had an old TV, a sagging couch that looked like you could almost fall into it, and a pair of weathered leather chairs. Off the living room was a fully stocked kitchen, a half bath, and a staircase that led up to the bunk rooms. Each of the rooms had 4 beds and a footlocker. The strange thing was, though, that the bedrooms had no windows at all. Trust me, you'll be glad of that, Keller said. After the tour, he brought us down to the living room and gave us a rundown of our duties. All right, one of you is to be in the fire tower at all times. You have to keep a constant watch over the valley. If you're in the tower, make sure you're wearing your uniform. That is very important. Now there's a trapdoor on the 2nd floor that leads to the ladder that will take you up to the observation deck. That will be helpful for those of you on the night shift. That being said, no one leaves this house after dark. Why is that? Asked Bruce. Well, from your current position, it's about 10 miles into the woods to the closest ranger station. It gets pretty dark out here at night, so it's best if you keep to the tower for your own safety. We all shared a dubious look at that, but Keller wasn't done. Now, there are a few safety rules I've left on the fridge in the kitchen for you. Follow these and the next 90 days should fly by. Food deliveries are once a week. There's enough gas to last you till the end of the month. If there's an emergency, you can hop on the short range in the kitchen. Your cell phone service will likely be hit or miss out here, so don't rely on that. If the snows come early, radio us for more wood and gas and we'll bring it. Good luck, he said. And with that, he was off. Now, the first few weeks, gravy. Bruce set up a system where each day someone was off and the other 4 kept watching 6-hour shifts. I opted to take the night shift since I was always up anyway. Nobody argued with me, and soon we settled into a routine. We took turns cooking meals and worked out a chore system. We got to know each other better as time went on. Miguel and I bonded over our taste in bands, and Laura and I actually had similar tastes in horror movies. Clara never seemed to warm up to anyone besides Bruce. Meanwhile, Bruce seemed to get along with everybody. The first 2 weeks seemed to fly by, with very little to report. Very little, except for the weird lights in the valley at night. Keller hadn't been joking about just how dark it was out here. Even with the moon out, it was so dark in the valley at night. I was glad for the lights in the fire tower. The tower itself had a square box encased in glass up top. From there, you could see in all 4 directions. With the valley as dark as it was easy to see even the smallest hint of light. And that was how I first noticed the firefolk. I climbed up there during the day, looking out at the bright spread of woods with you. But when I climbed up for the night shift, I found a very different view. It was like looking down from the top of the stairs and seeing the living room stretching below you. The shadows looked soft and dangerous in the absence of light. I walked to each window for the first few minutes, just looking for landmarks. It was so peaceful out here. There were no blinking radio towers or light pollution. No glowing windows or headlights. Just dark woods that held both possibilities and mysteries. As I looked out over the woods, I hoped I'd make it through these 90 days. I could get used to this kind of peace. My wonder only lasted about an hour, and soon I was on my phone. It seemed that being this high up, I had a decent signal. But as I scrolled through social media, I caught something out of the corner of my eye. There was a blinking light from the north-facing window. It was the one that looked down over the actual valley. I set my phone down as I walked toward the glass. It was like a firefly moving through the forest, though the shape was human. It was like a person seen through a thermal scanner. A bright white silhouette moving through the woods with slow and decisive steps. I almost knocked the binoculars over as I reached for them, but they didn't help much. When I focused in on the creature, all I could see was the same white-hot human figure. With the binoculars, I could pick out fingers and features. And then the figure turned and looked directly at me. I almost dropped the binoculars in surprise. I tried to snap a few pictures on my phone, but it mostly just looked like a bright flash on the lens. Somehow the details I could see with my eyes didn't translate through the camera. The figure moved about a mile through the woods. It walked for about an hour and a half before suddenly going out like someone flipped the switch. I blinked, thinking my eyes were playing tricks on me. The sun would be up in a few hours, but for now it was still dark behind the glass. I spent the rest of the night moving from window to window as I tried to see if whatever that had been would come back. I wondered if this was why Keller told us not to leave the tower at night. And that just led me to question whether we were safe or not out here. When my alarm went off at 6 a.m., I still didn't have answers. All I could do was wake Clara up so she could take her watch. I was sitting in the kitchen eating breakfast when Bruce and Miguel came in. They asked me how my shift had gone. It was peaceful, I said. There was a weird glow, though. It looked like a person made out of light. Spooked me pretty bad right up until it just disappeared, I said. Bruce laughed at that, asking if I snuck something into the coffee. But I noticed that Miguel was quiet. Maybe I hadn't been the only one to see something. We spent the morning doing a few chores around the station. At about 5, I decided to lay down for a few hours before getting up for watch again. Miguel had the watch again that night till my shift. I set my alarm for about 11:30 so I could have a word with him before he turned in. Throughout the day, he'd open his mouth like he wanted to ask me something, but he didn't say anything. And I felt sure that he'd seen something last night too. That night, I struggled to get up as my alarm went off. When I pushed the trapdoor open, I saw him jump a little before seeing that it was just me. "Couldn't sleep, huh?" he asked, handing me a cup of coffee. There was a fresh pot warming on a hot plate. "I just woke up. Figured I'd come up here." "How's it been tonight?" I answered. He looked over at the north face of the tower, as if looking for something. "And not too much. Been pretty quiet since sunset." The way his eyes lingered on the window, though, it made me wonder. "Miguel, can I ask you a question? Have you ever seen anything up here after dark? Like, in the woods?" Miguel laughed, and I figured he would deflect before his smile slipped a little. "Maybe," he said. All right, I don't know. Sometimes it seems like my eyes are playing tricks on me. Sometimes. Do you see glowing people in the woods?" I asked, and the way he looked at me was all the answer I needed. He told me that on the first night, he just assumed he dozed off for a minute. Before this job, he'd been working the day shift at Waffle House, so being awake after 9 wasn't something he did often. When he had blinked and the glowing figure was gone, Miguel assumed it was just a dream. When he saw it again tonight, however, he thought that there might be more to it than that. "They just travel through the woods," he began. taking their slow time until they eventually just poof go out. It's weird, you know. I don't think I've ever seen anything like it. We talked a little more after that, and when he started yawning, I told him to get some sleep. But I did see the firefolk again that night, and this time it wasn't alone. When the fluorescent dot blinked to life, I turned away from the south window. It seemed like the human-shaped blip had come to life in the same spot as last night. As it made its way toward where it disappeared last night, another came to life. It was a little deeper in the woods than the first, but it still made its slow way through the woods toward whatever it was traveling to. I wondered why they didn't burn the woods as they traveled. The path they left behind, it was always dark. Whatever made them glow must not produce any heat at all, I thought. Just like the night before, they traveled for about an hour and a half before suddenly just winking out. And that was how the first 2 weeks went. I actually started looking forward to seeing the firefolk at night. That was when I started calling them. When I told Miguel, well, he decided it was as good a name as any. They never appeared during the day, or if they did, nobody ever saw them. On the nights when Laura took over from Miguel, she never reported seeing them. But Miguel and I both suspected that she was too buried in her phone to notice them. It actually brought us together, made us friends, and we spent a lot of time thinking about what they might be. Then, on a night midway through the next week, something changed. When I came to relieve Miguel, he pointed to a little, in the North Valley, and said we had guests. Hikers, probably, he said with a shrug. I haven't seen any firefolk yet tonight, but maybe they're shy around strangers, huh? He left for bed after a while, and I settled in for another night of watching the woods. I kept an eye out for the firefolk, but the campfire down below kept drawing my eye. I hadn't seen anyone camping out there at night. The season was a little chilly for all, but the most determined hikers. And it was interesting to think of someone besides us in the valley. Their fire was blazing high, probably to keep away the chill. It gave me a shiver to think about camping on a night like this. It was a little later when the firefolk blazed to life that night. To my surprise, there were much more of them than I'd expected. They appeared in their usual spots, but their route took them towards the fire blazing in the distance. There were 2 of them at first, but a third was coming from behind the campers. The white-hot figures were brighter than the campfire. As they got closer and closer to the campers, I couldn't understand how they hadn't seen them yet. How could they not see the glow that was coming out of the woods right towards them? As they surrounded the campsite, all 4 lights suddenly just went out at the same time. The campfire and the 3 firefolk were all just gone, and I was left just looking into the darkness. After a few minutes, I reached for the radio on the table. I double-keyed the mic as we've been instructed to do. Dispatch here. Go ahead, fire Tower 4. Ranger Keller's voice crackled through the radio. I thought about how to begin before finally just deciding to tell him what I'd seen. Yeah, I have a campfire in the valley, about 10 to 15 miles from the tower, and it just suddenly went out. Keller was silent at that. Yeah, no one's supposed to be in the valley after dusk. It's policy. Sounds like you've spotted vagrants or something. Can you confirm how many were there and their general location? No clue on the numbers, it said. I looked at the map on the table, and I tried my best to estimate by flashlight. But yeah, they were near the North Basin when their fire just went out. More silence. When Keller came back on, there was something different in his voice. All right, roger that. We'll send someone out at first light to check. All right? If you see their fire pop up again, let us know. It's been dry lately, and a wildfire this late in the season could be pretty bad. Dispatch out. I didn't see the fire come back at all that night, but the fire folk didn't show up either. I was shaken awake the next day by Bruce around 11. Keller had brought supplies for the week. As the others unpacked them, he took me aside to ask me about the night before. I told him what I'd seen, except for the weird glowing people. He nodded as he made notes. All right, well, I went out there with a couple of rangers this morning, and we found the remains of their campsite, he began. We're guessing about 3 individuals were camping out there, but they were gone. But we found their stuff and cleaned up their mess. Good looking out, all right? And I'll be sure to put your name on the report. He turned to go, but I was still curious about something. "Sir, have you ever seen anything in the woods at night?" He gave me a look that told me he knew what I was talking about, but he wouldn't say so unless I was willing to say what I'd seen. It's funny you ask," he began. "I have seen a good many things out here at night." "What specifically do you mean?" he asked. I opened my mouth a few times, wanting to tell him, but not wanting to look crazy. And finally, I don't know why, but I decided I'm not saying anything. He then wished me a good day and left, kicking up dust and pulling off down the road. I was off that night, but when someone shook me in the wee hours of the morning, I woke up in a panic. It was Bruce, and he looked scared out of his mind. "I need to show you something I've never seen before," he said. I followed him back up the ladder and had to squint when I came to the top. The valley was brighter than it ever was. I could see more glowing figures than I'd ever seen. There were easily 7 or 8 of them moving around out there. Bruce seemed to be watching me for some kind of reaction. When I didn't appear surprised, he guessed that this wasn't the first time I'd seen them. "I call them firefolk," I told him. "Miguel and I see them every now and again. They don't seem like they want to bother us. So, I don't know, we just sort of keep an eye on them. But they're definitely kind of cool looking." Bruce calmed down a little after I told him it wasn't something new, and that's how we brought in a third into our little secret. Bruce kept a close eye on them after that, and we talked quietly about them some nights. I stayed up there with him that night, telling him everything I'd seen, and when they all winked out at once, he was speechless. I didn't tell him about the campers, just as I hadn't told Miguel, and we kept the secret for as long as we could. That was the end of October, and November passed with relative ease. We busied ourselves with the usual day-to-day chores as we kept watch over the valley. Keller came once a week to pick up trash and bring us supplies. We watched as the leaves changed and the first snow came around Thanksgiving. The valley went from a vibrant fall landscape to a barren one shortly after. We were told to keep a special eye out for blazes this time of year. The fallen leaves and dry wood were especially susceptible to burning, and as the snow melted, I noticed the valley wasn't the only thing changing. We began to notice that the firefolk were getting closer. It began as a sort of migration from the valley. They always burst to life around the same area as they had the previous day before, but now they were appearing closer and closer each night. By early December, there were more of them than I'd ever seen. I was watching 15 to 18 of them make their slow way closer to us each night. The closer they came, the more I remembered what Bruce told us in the back of the truck as we drove up to the fire tower for the first time. The Rangers went to drop off supplies one morning, and everyone was just gone. Maybe they weren't just stories. The next day, I pulled Miguel and Bruce outside and I told them what I'd seen. "I've noticed it too a few times," Miguel said. "But why come after us now? We've been here for 2 months without attracting their attention. What's so special about now?" "Who knows," Bruce said. "Maybe they're just curious about us. Like they've been curious about the hikers last month. We decided it still might be a good idea to let the others know." And that went about as well as expected. Laura and Claire looked at us like we were crazy. And then Laura just laughed. She reminded us that Halloween had been over a month ago. It was a little late in the season for spooky stories, she said. When we tried to convince her that it wasn't a joke, Claire rolled her eyes at us for waking her up on her day off and went back to bed. Laura looked at her watch and reminded us to get some rest before tonight. We shrugged. We tried to tell them. And with any luck, nothing would come of it anyway. As Christmas kept closer and the end of our 90-day watch loomed, the firefolk continued to get closer. More of them are showing up now. And the glow was so bright that it would be difficult for anyone to doubt they existed if the bedrooms had any windows. I was starting to wonder about that too. How long have the Rangers known about this? What do the Rangers do about them? The light from the firefolk would be easily visible from the front porch if anyone wanted to stand out there after dark. And then on Christmas Day, they decided to make their move. We'd eaten well that day. Keller dropped off a ham and some holiday desserts. Bruce had even wrapped a couple of pine cones in newspaper to hand out for a laugh. Miguel was on the early night shift, but when I climbed the ladder at 11:30, Miguel looked worried. I could see why. The glow was brighter than it had ever been from the firefolk. You could see them from every side now. They were boxing us in, surrounding the tower, and there was no telling what they were going to do. "I think," Miguel said softly, "I think I'll sleep on the floor up here tonight. I don't think I'll be able to sleep knowing they're right outside the house." I nodded, feeling about the same. As the night went on, the glowing figures came closer and closer. Finally, I shook him awake and told him I was going to warn the others. "Look, if we can get everyone up here, maybe we can hunker down until the first. The Rangers must know some way to stop them," I said. But that's when something shook the bottom of the tower. I opened the hatch and I saw the brightness spilling into the house at the base of the ladder. The light was so blinding that I had to squint against it. And when I saw it shining at the bottom of the hatch, I pushed the trapdoor closed and locked it. There was banging from the trapdoor. Something pushed at the lid hard enough to make it splinter. But nothing came through. We tried the radio, but all we got was static. Miguel and I took up what weapons we could find. We found a fire axe and a crowbar under the desk, and we held on to them the whole night. We waited for them to break in, not daring to fall asleep. But as dawn came, we decided we were probably safe for now. We slowly went down to check the house, but we couldn't find anyone. Their beds were unmade, and all their stuff was still lying around. It was like they all got up that morning and went out on a barefoot hike. There were no signs of the firefolk either. No signs of a break-in or a struggle at all. If it weren't for the banged-up trapdoor, I could almost believe that nothing had happened. Miguel and I moved some supplies up into the tower. The radio still wasn't working, so we decided to just hold out there until the next supply drop-off. But the second night, well, it was even worse than the first. The banging was definitely more aggressive this time around. And all through the night, we found ourselves sitting on a hatch as the bolts holding it in place groaned against the onslaught. The hatch hadn't been made to hold against something like that. As dawn came and the lights below began to go out, Miguel and I breathed a sigh of relief. I was so tired, I just wanted to go to sleep. But Miguel had other plans. "I think we should try to walk out while it's still light," he said. I've been lying back on some blankets. My eyes were already getting heavy, and I looked up at him as if I couldn't believe what he was saying. "We're both dead tired, man. We'd never make it to the 20 or so miles out of here before nightfall," I pointed out. "Look, we gotta try," he said. "I'm not sure that hatch can survive another night. I don't like the idea of being stuck out here to find that out. What happens if Keller doesn't come out here on the first man? What do you think about that? What if all of this was just him feeding us to those things and keeping them in the valley? You remember what Bruce said when we first came out here? We wouldn't be the first group to just poof disappear. We went back and forth on it, and in the end, he packed up some of the supplies and left. That night's assault was much less violent than the night before. As I sat on the hatch, I wondered if some of them had gone after Miguel. I hoped they wouldn't find him. But I think I knew they would. I stayed in the tower for another 4 days and nights. My fingers started forming blisters from holding onto a fire axe every night. But when I woke up on the 5th day to a banging at the front door, I knew I'd survived. It was dawn, and I was never more grateful to hear another human being. Keller smiled up at me from the ladder. I had a good feeling about you. I'm glad one of you survived this round of probationary hiring. All right, now come on. We'll get you a uniform and show you the ropes." And that was how I came to work for the Forestry Service. Unfortunately, the firefolk weren't the strangest thing I would see in my time in the woods. It's been 2 years since Keller took me out of the woods in his old truck, but very little has changed in the park since then. We still don't allow camping in the valley, though we do clean up around 5 campsites within a year. Some people just don't listen. We also don't go into the valley after dark, no matter the emergency. We don't allow campfires in the valley, but you can still see a glow most nights if the skies were clear. And of course, at least once a year, I take 4 or 5 prospective rangers up to Tower Force so they can do their 90 days of probation. I asked Keller once why we take them up there when so few come back, and all he would tell me was this: "Kid, those aren't the worst things in these woods. There are worse things, weirder things out there." But if someone can survive the fire folk of the valley, then they've got a good chance of surviving the service. Remember this, son, if it ain't. Remember this, son. If it ain't us, it'll be the tourists. Lake Superior never gives up. Her and all the other Great Lakes. They have enough secrets that would put a church boneyard to shame. As an underwater search and recovery team, we do what we can to bring those secrets back to the surface. For the cops, the grieving families, for justice. But sometimes, when the lake gives us a glimpse of what they're hiding, some of us don't live to tell the tale. I grew up around Duluth, but I've traveled across all the states around them. There are caves beneath those lakes, trenches so deep you couldn't see the sun after a certain point. And in those caves are currents that will take you and never let you go. This isn't to scare anyone off from visiting, but be careful while you're there enjoying nature's bounty. Otherwise, I might get a call about you one day. I'm a diver. I've been diving in the Great Lakes since I was young. I can remember snorkeling with my brother when I could barely swim. Growing up, we'd push each other to dive as deep as we could in those crystal clear waters. I ended up joining my college dive team, as well as the rowing team. And after college, I decided I wanted to learn more. I learned as much as I could about diving. I became a volunteer diver for the local sheriff's department before finally joining their underwater recovery unit. The UWRU dives all over the state, but most of my calls are for people who had been lost in the Great Lakes region. It's a lot of water, and it's easy to get in over your head, so to speak. I've seen a lot in my 5 years on the team, but I've been okay so far because someone was there to teach me the rules. On my first day on the team, I met with my partner, Michael Drake. Michael had been diving in the area for decades and was a legend in his field. He'd saved a bunch of cave divers a few years back. He has been finding bodies and lost items in the Great Lakes since I was a kid. He was the go-to guy for body recovery, and my supervisor said he'd ask for me personally. I've heard good things, he said, shaking my hand as I took a seat. You're top of your class at Michigan State, took the dive team to nationals, and you had nearly 500 registered dives. That's impressive for someone so young. I was tickled, but when he got serious, I knew he wasn't just gassing me up. Diving with the UWRU is a little different from what you're used to. Volunteer divers play by their own rules, he began. But here, we have set protocols that we follow when we dive. They may seem silly, but they're the sorts of things that could save your life. So listen closely. Now, some of them were simple enough, and were things I already did when I dived. Check your gear before you dive. Always put out your safety markers. Dive in pairs whenever you're on UWRU business. Don't do long dives in caves you don't know. These were simple rules that most divers followed, but Michael had some that made less sense when I started out. They were rules that made more sense the longer I dove with him. Like the rule about swirling algae. This is what he told me. If you see algae floating on the surface, that's fine, but if you see it moving in a circle, pack your gear and leave the area. Okay, so that one seemed strange at first. I'd never actually seen algae swirling in a circle. The first time we encountered it, I was half in the water when he grabbed me by the shoulder. He was an older guy, like I said, but his strong grip left me no room for argument as he walked me back out of the water. Pack it in, he said, taking off his mask and walking back to the truck. What? Why? I asked, walking strangely in my swim fins. This is the spot they think the kid disappeared in. We were looking for a boy about 7. He'd gone further down. This part fed into a river, and this stretch of water in particular had a lot of roots and snags where a body could get caught. We were starting here because it seemed the best place to find him. The plan had been to work our way back up the stream. Now, it seemed my partner was giving up, and I was very curious to know why. The algae, he said. It's circling. He said it matter-of-factly, like it was as obvious as the mask on my face. And? I said, needing a little more than that. He sighed and rolled his eyes. Rule 7. We don't swim when the algae circles. As I took my gear off, I heard him call the head office and tell them that we'd found the kid. He said the spot was good and the algae was circling. He also said we would give it another half hour and then go retrieve what was left. I was as confused about what he was saying as I was by the situation. What was down there, and why couldn't we go get this kid? As he hung up the phone, he went to sit on the tailgate, tapping the spot beside him. Sorry, kid. I forgot you're new at this. We don't go diving when the algae circles. It means there's something down there that could be dangerous for us. I looked at the swirl of green. The path it took was almost hypnotic. I wondered what could be beneath the surface. What is it? I asked. Yeah, I got no idea, Michael said. Not sure I really want to know. But sometimes it appears, and when it goes away, there are signs left behind that something was there. It took about 45 minutes for the algae to stop swirling and float down the river. Once it was gone, we put on our gear and made our way to the spot. Michael had been eyeballing it, and as we dove, we found what we were looking for. There was a skull and some bones left behind, but nothing much to identify with. They pulled the dental records after we brought them up. It concluded that it was the kid we were looking for. As Michael called it in, I got a good look at the bones. They were something. The kid had barely gone in an hour ago, but these bones were picked clean. It was like something out of a jungle movie. I wondered briefly if the Great Lakes could support piranhas, and I shook away the thought pretty quickly. The waters here were too cold for tropical fish after all. But that led to more questions. What had done this? And where did the rest of the body go? If there were rules in place for it, then how often did it happen? Michael must have known I needed to talk. After we packed the remains away for the cops, he told me to come have lunch with him. We went to this little hole-in-the-wall barbecue place called Smoky's. When he slid a beer towards me, I started to refuse. We were on the job, and it was frowned upon to show up to a dive with a buzz on. But he pushed it closer, saying I would want it. As I sipped at it and ate the best ribs I've ever had, he told me about his early days on the team. Yeah, when I was first starting out, my old dive partner told me that the UWRU only had 5 real rules. There's the one about not swimming when the algae swirls. The one about not diving deeper than you can see the sun. There's also the one about not diving into caves you hear clicks in if you find underwater caves. Don't surface into them. Never try to take bodies from any depth below sunlight. Everything else, well, it's common sense. I nodded, swallowing the ribs before asking what it was we were looking out for. Michael thought about it for a second, trying to find the best way to fill me in. Well, the Great Lakes area has its fair share of weird critters about, and the lakes are no different. My old partner called them halfway people, though their real name is something long and hard to pronounce. Them halfway people. Though their real name is something long and hard to pronounce. Yeah, they once lived peacefully with the natives in this region, but the Europeans taking over the land seems to have angered them. Now that we've hunted off a lot of the local fish and marine life, some of them supplement their diet with the occasional swimmer or unsupervised inner tuber, he said. I mulled this over as I chewed at a rib, trying to decide if he was messing with me or not. I've been hazed before, of course, and this seemed like a classic case of mess with a new guy. I was waiting for him to break into laughs and for him to talk about how he got me and how gullible I must be to fall for something like that. The longer it didn't happen, the more certain I became that he wasn't trying to pull a joke. Okay, so you're telling me that there are cannibal mermaids in the Great Lakes region? Well, no, Michael said. They aren't really mermaids, not like we know them. And cannibals would suggest that they shared any kind of relationship with us. They are river spirits, and they have decided that we're tasty as hell. I'm not telling you these things to scare you, just to make you aware. We have rules for a reason, so be aware of them. And beware of the things they're there to protect you from. I told him I would, though I certainly didn't believe in a bunch of flesh-eating merfolk in the Great Lakes region. I wouldn't see any of them for my first 3 years, but I would see the swirling algae a few times. And when I heard the clicks while cave diving, I always left the area. The halfway people were always mindful enough to leave the bones of whoever they took, though whether that was kindness or not was open for debate. They always sent enough back for identification, usually skulls or half-chewed fingers. Michael said it was just part of the job. Well, yeah, nothing much can be done about it, was his mantra. We can't fight them. And the couple of times I've seen someone try, it ends up being somewhere between frivolous and devastating. I didn't bother to ask him what that meant, and we proceeded with our job as usual. Believe it or not, there's always more than enough to keep a diver busy with the Great Lakes. If it isn't missing persons, then it's lost vehicles that have gone into a body of water, or running the magnets or metal detectors for goods used in crimes. I probably pulled about 30 handguns out of one lake, plus safes and other things that people try to hide in the lakes and surrounding rivers. The number of criminals who think it's a good idea to hide money in the water is astounding, and they always seem confused when the police tell them that it had fallen apart when they fished out the loot. Even the disappearances weren't all strange. The Great Lakes are a pretty great place to fish, swim, and take your boat out for the day in the water. They're also a great place to get drunk and run out of gas on your jet ski, or flip your kayak over and discover you don't have the upper body strength you thought you had. What I've learned over the years is that there's a lot of ways someone can get swept up in the current and float off for parts unknown. For every weird water disappearance, dozens were easily explained, though this didn't make them any less devastating for the families. The water doesn't discriminate on the people it decides to take. I have pulled out track stars to beauty queens and everything in between. The water takes them all, and if you're lucky, you get a body back for a proper funeral. If you aren't, you get a handful of bones with lots of little teeth marks in them, and an odd sense of dread. I was nearly 4 years into the job when I first saw one of the halfway people. 4 years in, when we broke the rules, and it cost us dearly. We were looking for a raft that had gone missing. The raft was from Big Time Rapids, a company that did tours for the rapids off the coast of Ohio. These rapids, they're not for the weak of heart. The troop of Eagle Scouts who tried to conquer them started out with 4 rafts, 20 scouts, and 4 scout leaders. When they came to the end, they had 3 rafts, 17 scouts, and 3 scout leaders. 2 of them had fallen off when the raft was swept into a narrow offshoot, and they had been pulled from the water just fine. The other 3 scouts and their scoutmaster had been swept into a ravine and were now lost. The Park Service tried to find them from the air, but they couldn't spot any sign of the missing scouts. Search parties had been equally as unsuccessful. It was eventually decided that a team would need to follow them up the passage to retrace their steps. In the end, they hired us, and we took a small raft up the stream they were last seen in. The passage would have been difficult to see from the air, with the dense tree cover around it, and the cliffs on either side were so steep that the search teams couldn't even get close to the ravine. The scouts would have had no more luck in steering their raft than we would. We held on as we were bounced around mercilessly by the rapids. There was no steering or paddling. The path was too narrow, and so we were swept along as we hunkered down and tried not to get tossed out ourselves. I saw some scuffs along the rocks and some broken plastic pieces that might have been in or once. And for half a second, I thought I saw a long red streak before we came skipping out into a small open pool in the middle of the canyon. It was fed by several different streams and continued into a dozen others that I could see. From the middle, however, the water was calm and the raft floated idly without using our paddles. As we sat there, Michael decided that this was where we should look. Okay, yeah, if they came into here, then they no doubt came to rest somewhere nearby. If they sank, then we could find their raft and radio for help. If not, then we can pick a stream and press on, he said. So we got our gear on and rolled out into the placid waters of the pond. Looking down, I immediately knew we were in for a swim. The blue went deeper than I'd ever seen, and it wasn't until you really looked that you realized how deep it was. The pond seemed to go on forever, and the shore was lined with little eroded shelves that came up from the dark like monstrous teeth. On one of these was the ragged remains of a raft, and caught up in the debris was the body of a man. He was tangled up in one of the ropes, floating calmly in the depths. He was just about at that line, the imaginary line that we didn't cross. Rule number 3, don't dive deeper than where you can see the sun. Michael seemed to weigh his options before acting. Coming to a decision, he grabbed some rope and handed the end of it to me. He then signed out that he was going to attach it. When he has it tied snug, he wants me to pull it back up, and he would follow with the raft. I nodded, made a circle with my thumb and forefinger as he swam down to set it up. I watched him go, keeping a hand on the boat for stability. It wasn't much. It was a 5-man boat we got from the same company the scouts had gotten theirs from. He was swimming back up, ready to help me with the rope, when a bright red flash stopped in mid-swim. It was hard to see through the water, but I was sure there was something poking through the front of his wetsuit. Suddenly, he was pulled into the depths, and whatever got him seemed a hell of a lot stronger than I was. He was reeled down like a fish on a line, and before I could stop myself, I was swimming after him. I knew the rules. We never went into water too deep to see the light. But I didn't care. I needed to save him, and I was going to help Michael. But as I followed him, I could see something growing large as I followed the trail of blood. It was a honeycomb of caves dug straight into the side of the rock. I stopped and gawked at it for a second, in awe of how much effort something like this must have taken. I didn't think at the time that they'd been made by the hands of anything, and figured that they were just strange, natural occurrences. The Great Lakes region was full of weird stuff. I figured this was just some odd, natural phenomenon. I didn't know the caves, no more than I knew the basin we were diving in. All I knew was that Michael had been dragged down, and the blood in the water was clear enough to follow his trail. As I headed lower, I took out my knife so I could mark my path. Cave Exploring 101 is always don't explore caves that you don't know. I knew this. That was first day stuff. So as I swam deeper, I scratched the wall so I wouldn't get lost when I needed to escape. It was easy enough to mark the walls, and the surface was smoother than I thought could occur naturally. There was no pebbling or rocks poking out. The walls were uniformly smooth as I followed them deeper into one of the caves. And the deeper I went, the more I heard the clicking. The clicking rule was another one I never really had to use. The caves we dove in were usually well traveled, and the clicking I heard was usually just rocks falling. This was different, though. That sound, I never heard it underwater before, and it made me a little dizzy when it came too close. I wasn't sure what it was, but I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand on edge as I swam deeper. Suddenly, the tunnel we were in pitched upward. I followed it up and found myself in an underground cave system. And just like that, I've broken another one of our cardinal rules: do not surface in caves. As soon as my flashlight came out of the water, that rule made a lot more sense. The cave I was in was huge, with the ceiling hanging what seemed like miles above me. Stalagmites hung down like dripping teeth above my head. The flashlight I brought with me could only create a tiny island of light. Anything beyond 3 feet ahead of me was pure darkness. I turned in a circle, trying to get my bearings, and as I did, I realized I could hear a noise in the nearby dark. It was a chewing sound, something like raw chicken being eaten with a toothless mouth. I spun around trying to find the source, and then my flashlight landed on 4 creatures that would haunt my dreams forever. The name Halfway People, it made so much more sense after seeing them. Have you ever heard the original Little Mermaid story? The one where they cut her fin in half to make legs, and each step looks painful. That's what these things look like. They were blue, their scales throwing up refractions on the walls and floors. Their arms and legs looked like flippers that grew out wrong. Their fingers were too thin, their feet too thick, and their heads were the worst. They had human heads, but the lips and eyes were all wrong. Some of their lips were too thick. Some of them had eyes that were barely there, but they all had teeth like jagged rows of sewing needles. They were hunched over something, bending down to tear off hunks of flesh. When the light hit them, they all sat up and hissed at me. The gills on their necks flared open like wounds to reveal the red flesh underneath. And I saw Michael in the middle of it all. His dead eyes stared up at the ceiling as pieces of him were scattered among the rocks. I quickly dove back into the water and began kicking frantically back the way I'd come from. My whole way back, I kept hearing the clicks I'd heard earlier, but now they meant something different. They were hunting me, tracking me through the tunnels. My blood ran cold, even as I swam as fast as I could out of those tunnels. I could be speared at any minute, the Halfway People swimming out to corner me from any of the tunnels I had to swim by. I would be caught, just like Michael was. I would be dragged back into the darkness to join him. These tunnels were their home, their territory. I made myself slow down and look for the marks I'd made on the way down, but I worried I wouldn't have enough oxygen to make it. The needle on my tank was a little under halfway down the gauge. I needed to calm myself down, or else I'd use up my oxygen. I was probably about a quarter of the way out when something else joined the clicking. It was a scraping noise this time, like claws on stone, and it was getting closer, much closer than the clicks. I had my knife in my hand, but I didn't think it'd do much good against those things. So I started swimming faster, probably wasting more oxygen than I needed to. My arms were burning as I pushed myself beyond my limits, and the same thoughts kept running through my head. They could get me, eat me, and I would die beneath the water without ever having seen the light again. When I finally saw sunlight again, I almost yelped with joy. And when I rolled into the boat at long last, I cut the tethers and I stripped off my tank and fins. I was looking for the paddles when something hit the underside of the boat hard enough to almost flip it over. I grabbed the oars and was soon paddling for my life as I made for one of the narrow streams on the other side of the lake. My boat was hit a second time. I had to hold on for dear life as my tank slipped over the side and sank to the bottom. I didn't really care. It was just dead weight at this point. I paddled frantically, really putting that rowing experience to good use. When I squeezed into the stream, I pulled in as the current grabbed hold of me. My diving company found me about 5 miles upstream. I was panting and pulling myself away from the water as fast as I could. They got me checked out and they got me a clean bill of health, but I was in no shape to dive for quite a while. They found me with only about half my gear, no dive partner, and some pretty clear signs that I'd had the crap scared out of me. The boss came to see me at home a week after the incident, and as we sat in my living room, he asked me if I'd seen them. I asked him who, not wanting to sound like a lunatic, but he gave me a look that told me he knew already. The halfway people. Michael did something to get their attention, didn't he? He asked. I nodded. I didn't really want to talk about Michael, but I felt like I had to get it out. He went too deep. Deep, I whispered, and the boss nodded. Michael probably thought it would be okay. He was always a little brash, wasn't he? Especially when he was first starting out. But after seeing a diving partner taken by the halfway people, he was careful to follow the rules. Was it your first time seeing him? I nodded, and he patted my shoulder in a knowing way. It's always difficult after the first time. If you want to quit, I understand. But I wish you wouldn't. You're a great diver, maybe even better than Michael, and I need someone like you on my team. Why don't you think about it and get back to me? It took some time, a long while I suppose, but I did eventually get back in the water, and over time I began to feel comfortable with doing dive missions again. Even so, I was careful to follow the rules after that, and I always make sure that the new guys understand just how important they are. We don't swim where the algae circles. We don't go into caves when we hear the clicks. We don't surface in underwater caves we are unfamiliar with. And above all, we never ever dive so deep that the sun can't touch us. I know what lies beneath the surface now. I just hope no one else has to. The way I see it, if you don't know that I exist, then I'm doing my job correctly. My name is Ben McFarlane, and I work as a municipal sewer inspector in the town of Tahama Sound, Ontario. It is not the most glamorous job, but hey, somebody's got to do it. And it puts food on the table. You'd probably think that working as a sewer inspector isn't that exciting. And yeah, for the most part, you'd be right. Most of the time, all I'm doing is checking the pipes for damage. Unless there's a reason for me to investigate a certain area, most of what I do is routine inspection, which helps ensure that the sewers remain in good working order. Trust me, nobody wants to see what happens when they aren't. Thankfully, a lot of what I do can be done without me needing to crawl through pipes. I can use a small camera to help me do the inspection. But with some of the larger pipes and cisterns, I need to actually go inside and take a look. It's never the best part of my day, but like I said before, somebody's got to do it. Going down into the bigger tunnels is always a little unnerving. Part of it is the claustrophobic atmosphere, and part of it is the knowledge that you're basically standing in a river of literal human waste. I can deal with it now, but back when I first started, the smell alone was darn near impossible to deal with. Ask most sanitation workers, and I'm sure they'll have stories about what they found in the sewers before. Heck, most of it isn't even stuff that people flush down the toilet. It's the stuff that people drop down manhole covers, or the stuff that gets washed into the sewers by the rain. Dead animals are surprisingly common, as are kids' toys. I found an entire bicycle in the sewer once, and I've got a buddy who found a loaded gun down there. Somebody probably thought they'd get rid of it by tossing it in the sewer. Someone was wrong. But of all the strange things I've experienced during my time working in the sewers, none of it compares to the stuff I see in the pipes on the southeast side of town. The things down there. Why? I don't usually like to talk about them. Heck, I might not even be legally allowed to talk about them. I guess we'll find out, won't we? I've had a few drinks tonight, and I'm feeling particularly chatty. So why not spill the beans? Hey, maybe somebody out there will tell me something I don't already know. I've been on the job for about a year or so before getting sent to the southeast side of town. It's closer to the lake and the downtown area, so there's some deeper pipes there. I'd always figured that there was a reason they only really ever sent certain people down there. I heard that those tunnels were old and a little labyrinthian. Anyone who didn't know what they were doing could very easily get lost. But after we got hit with a very nasty rainstorm back in summer of 2013, they needed to send someone down to check on some sensors, and I just so happened to be one of the guys who was available. A bad rainstorm can push a sewer system to its limit, so it really wasn't that surprising that we'd gotten that kind of call, and at the time, I didn't think there was anything that strange about it. My supervisor told me to head down towards the pump house on the southwest side of town like it was any other priority inspection, and I went along with no questions asked. It was a few streets away from downtown. I'd seen it before, but never had a reason to go inside until then. I was working with a couple other newbies at the time. A guy by the name of Stuart Long, who'd only been on the job for around 3 months or so, and another guy by the name of Tomas, who'd started around the same time that I had. We'd arrived at the pump house, and when we got there, we noticed another team waiting on us. This wasn't too shocking either. Depending on the size of the job, they might have sent some other guys in to help us handle it. The guy in charge was an older man who looked to be pushing 60. He had sort of a Santa Claus on summer vacation look, with white hair, a short white beard, a big beer belly, and a no-nonsense expression. He watched us get out of his truck with a look of stern disapproval before huffing and trudging over to us. "Where's the usual fellas?" he asked. "I don't know." "Out? They called us," I replied. "Oh my God, you ever worked on the Southeast Approach Channel before?" he asked. Yeah, we've been in the ones on the north side of town." I said, "That's not what I asked, kid. Have you ever worked in this one before?" Something about the way he asked this question struck me as a little odd. I'd worked in an approach channel before. I knew the drill. What did it matter which one I'd worked in? For the unenlightened, an approach channel is a cistern filled with wastewater. They feed into a deep tunnel, which feeds into a water treatment plant, and they're considered to be fairly dangerous due to their depth. If you fall off the ladder on your way down, you're in for a long drop into a biohazardous lake unless you're properly tethered, and the harmful gases that can accumulate in them. Standard operating procedure is to always test the air before entering one, just to make sure that it's even safe to breathe down there. Being reckless while going into an approach channel is a recipe for disaster, and I would have understood if the old man was concerned about us not having dealt with one before. But the way he spoke to us, it implied that this one was different somehow, which didn't make a whole heck of a lot of sense to me. "What's the difference?" I asked. "Same procedure, right?" "No, not the same procedure. We need people experienced with this approach channel. These tunnels are a little different than what you're used to." He said, "Look, the boss sent us here. I'm sure we'll manage." Tomas said, "You can show us what we need to do." The old man didn't respond to him. He just shook his head and turned away. "Okay, I'm going to call this in and clear it first with the boss. You three don't move until I get back." I traded a look with both Tomas and Long as the old man trudged away. He said something to the two guys who were working with him before getting back into his truck to make a call. Part of me was obliged to try and just get to work, but looking at the two other guys that the old man had with him, I had a feeling they'd try to stop me. One of them, another older guy with a receding hairline and a bushy mustache, was watching us like a hawk. So we waited. After a few minutes, the old man got out of his truck again, said something to his buddy with the mustache, and trudged back over to us. "Bad news, fellas. Looks like our usual company is retired. I guess you're the replacement. So, can we get to work?" I asked. Yeah, we can get to work, the old man said. Come on, let's get going. With that, he turned and led us into the pump house. Well, I suppose I might as well introduce myself. Name's Troy. My colleagues here are Craig and Peter. He gestured to the two men who were with him, Mr. Mustache, who I assumed was Craig, and the other guy, who looked to be in his mid-30s and had sunken eyes, as if he hadn't slept in a few days. The one who I assumed was Craig just gave us a nod, while the guy I figured was Peter gave a lazy half-wave before they followed us into the pump house. So if you don't mind me asking, what's so special about this channel? I asked. I guess you'll be seeing for yourself soon enough, Troy replied, as he started down a set of stairs. The guys you're replacing, well, a fella named Tom, he always had a set of rules for working down here. He passed them on to me and Craig when we started. We passed them on to Peter. And I guess it's time to pass them on to you two. Rules? I asked. What kind of rules? The kind you listen very, very closely to, kid. Troy looked back at me, before his eyes shifted to Tomas and Long behind me. Very closely. He descended the rest of the way down the stairs, where there was a hatch and a concrete floor beneath us, along with a large locker on the far side of the room. Rule number 1, Troy began. You don't enter this part of the sewers alone. You stay in a group of at least 3 to 4 at all times. No more, no less. Too many, and it slows you down. Too few, and you might not come back at all. He trailed off, watching as Craig cracked open the hatch to test the air inside. Rule number 2. You do not enter this part of the sewers without a gun and a radio. He opened the locker on the far side of the room, and I was taken aback to see a collection of several handguns inside, along with boxes of ammunition and one shotgun amongst the usual PPE. Troy clipped one of the guns to his belt, along with one of the radios, before handing a pair off to Peter and looking over at us. Who's taking it? He asked. Whoa, just hold up a minute, Long interjected. What the hell is down there? I don't know, Troy replied. I hate to say it, but it ain't our job to know. I leave that to someone else. Our job is to follow the rules. You follow them, and you'll be fine. Long seemed skeptical, but I looked at the gun in Troy's hand, and I took it. I wasn't sure if he was having a laugh with us or not, but I was there to do a job, and I intended to do it. Troy gave me a quiet nod before thrusting the second gun over to Long. He didn't seem too happy to get it. Are we going to have to use these? He asked. Not if you do as I say you won't. Rule 3. If you see a pipe or a tunnel with heavy spider webs, don't go down it. Doesn't matter if that's where the sensor is. You make a note of it, report it to your supervisor, and you leave it alone. Spider webs, I thought. What the hell is he talking about? Rule number 4. If you find a body, and odds are you will find a body, don't touch it. Don't try to move it. Hell, don't even get close to it. And don't waste the supervisor's time reporting it. The only time the bodies get reported is when they're human. I'm sorry, you've been finding human bodies down there? I asked. Rarely, he replied. But it's been known to happen. And if we do find one, the same rules apply. Don't approach it. Don't touch it. Stay as far away as possible. I could see some of the color draining from Long's face. Rule number 5. If you see anyone else down there, you are not to interact with them. You do not follow them if they try to lead you somewhere. If they ask you for help, you do not help them. I don't care if they're crying and begging. You leave them alone. You report it to your supervisor. There are people down there. I asked. Normally, far as I know, Tom only ever ran into a couple during his career. I've only ever seen one. Look, like I said, best to leave them alone. Why? I asked. If there's someone stuck down there, we'd have an obligation to help them. That would be very ill-advised, Troy said. You don't want to anger the things that are down there. Which leads me to Rule 6. Avoid killing anything you come across down there. They're not yours to kill. And if you have absolutely no choice, if you have to break that rule for the sake of self-defense, then we leave immediately. That's rule number 7. You're safe down there, Craig said, interrupting our conversation. Good. All right, let's get suited up. Oh, and rule number 8, the final rule. If anything happens to any member of our team, we leave immediately. We don't go after them. We don't try to help them. We leave immediately. Is that clear? Look, I don't care if it's me begging you for help. You leave me behind. Long and I remained silent, neither of us entirely sure how to react. Troy had made it sound as if we were about to descend into a level of hell. I couldn't imagine what the hell could possibly be down there to elicit a list of rules like that, and I wasn't entirely sure I wanted to find out either. Well, are you fellas getting ready or not? Troy asked as he put on his PPE. The quicker we get down there, the quicker we're out again. If this is so dangerous, why are they sending us? Long asked. Shouldn't they be sending, I don't know, the cops or something? They tolerate us being down there, so long as we don't disturb them. They wouldn't be so forgiving toward the local police, Troy replied. Listen, kid, you obey the rules and you'll be fine, you got that? We've been doing this for years without any problems. You keep your head on your shoulders, you do what you say, and you go home safe. All right? Long still didn't seem convinced, but I did. By this point, I was morbidly curious about what exactly was down there, and Troy's assurance that they'd come out unscathed before did set me at ease a little bit. These rules sounded kind of scary, but I mean, what could realistically go wrong? With Troy keeping us in line, everything would probably be fine. And besides, I still wasn't convinced that this wasn't all some sort of elaborate prank the old man was pulling. I grabbed myself a set of PPE and got ready, and after a moment's hesitation, Long did the same. When we were ready, Craig opened up the hatch in the floor, and Tomas helped get us tethered so that we wouldn't plummet down into the waters below if we slipped on the ladder, and then we finally began our descent. Troy went first, climbing down the ladder and into the darkness below. I went second, followed by Peter, and followed by Long. We climbed down into the approach channel in relative silence, only really speaking again once we made it to the bottom of the ladder. Troy helped get me untethered before doing the same for Peter and Long as they reached the bottom, and while he did that, I got my first look at the dreaded southeast approach channel. I can't say there was a whole heck of a lot to see. The walls were boxy and flat, and the dirty wastewater trickled over my boots and into the pipe, sending it even deeper through the sewer system. The sensor should have been mounted on the ceiling, and I traced the black conduit line with my flashlight as I searched for the sensor they connected to. Peter and Long stayed back as Tomas and Craig lowered our tools down after us, while Troy came up behind me. Should be quick work, he noted. Rain doesn't seem to have done much here. Water level still fairly low. I saw his flashlight shift upward toward the ceiling before he spotted the sensor. He trudged through the water to get closer to it, and I followed him. No external damage, I noted. The conduit line looks good too. Yeah, we'll run our tests and get out of here, Troy said. The approach channel is usually pretty safe. Usually, I replied, and Troy pointed his flashlight up towards a set of silky spider webs hanging from the ceiling a few feet behind the sensor. They don't typically come up here, but every now and then you might find some proof of some young ones trying to get into the pump house. I looked over at him. They try to break into the pump house? I asked. Do they ever get in? Not that I've heard of. Can't imagine they'd stay long if they did. There was nothing to eat there. What exactly are they? I asked. And don't you tell me it's not for us to know. You've seen them, right? What do they look like? Troy had started to answer, when suddenly I heard Long screaming and swearing up a storm. Both of us turned to look, just in time to see something large skittering up the wall behind him. I only caught a brief glimpse of it, but it seemed to be roughly the size of a dog with more legs than I could count. Long stared at it with wide, horrified eyes as he fumbled with his gun, before pulling it free. I saw Troy's eyes widen before Long fired 5 times. Only 1 or 2 of the bullets actually hit the target. I heard Peter cry out in pain and grab at his arm before falling, and whatever it was that Long had actually been shooting it collapsed into the shallow water, its pale body twitching violently. What did you just do? Troy demanded, running over to Peter's side. He was coming for me, Long protested, before noticing what he'd done to Peter. I saw his eyes widen in horror. Oh no, I didn't. Rule 6. You don't kill anything down here. You leave them alone, and they leave you alone. Troy roared, before his attention returned to Peter. How bad is it? It's just a scratch, boss. I think I got hit by a ricochet, Peter said, as Troy inspected his wound. I've never seen a gunshot wound before, but there was a lot of blood for it just to be a scratch. All right, we'll get you topside, Troy said, and we'll come back down tomorrow with someone who knows how to follow the rules. He shot Long a death glare before his radio crackled to life. Troy, everything good down there? Craig asked. No, it isn't. One of the newbies got jumpy, shot at a centipede, he huffed, and put a hole in Peter in the process. You think you can reel him back up? Yeah, sure thing. Hook him up. Tomas and I will bring him topside. Troy quietly hooked Peter up to the line before helping him out of the ladder. You take it easy on the way up. We're going to get that checked out, okay? He promised. Thanks, boss, Peter said quietly. Troy's attention returned to Long next as he fixed him in a death glare. You up the ladder behind him. And you, he looked at me. His expression softened just a little. Behind him. I'll go up last. Peter started to meekly climb the ladder, although it seemed like Craig and Tomas were doing most of the work, hoisting him up rung by rung. Once he made it part of the way up, Long started to hook himself up to climb behind him. Although before he could hook himself in, I saw him pause for a moment, staring at Troy. What is it? Troy asked. Long craned his neck a little, his hand moving to his gun again. And it was then that both Troy and I realized that he hadn't been looking at Troy. He'd been looking at what was behind him. I only saw a shadow perched on the roof of the tunnel, but that was all that Long needed to see before he started shooting again. Don't, Troy said. But by the time Troy had gotten the word out, that trigger-happy idiot had already started shooting again. And this time, the thing that came for him didn't drop dead. Instead, it launched itself off the ceiling of the tunnel, crashing into the ground a few feet away from me. Wait, Troy tried to protest, before the thing in front of us knocked him aside, dashing him against the wall. Long scrambled ahead, retreating deeper into the tunnel, while Peter frantically tried to unholster his gun. Troy, what's going on down there? I heard Craig calling over the radio. Troy, can anyone respond? The shape in front of us turned, looking over at me, and long 8 eyes shone in the darkness. And though I could only see the shadow of the creature before us, I saw enough. It had a body like a spider, with 8 long legs. Only its body was much larger than any spider I'd ever seen before. Much larger. This creature was almost the size of a small car, but it wasn't its size that terrified me. It was the humanoid torso coming out of the front of it. The 2 arms that ended in razor-sharp claws. The snarling mouth that made noises that almost sounded human. When this impossible thing looked at us, I saw real intelligence in those eyes. It was studying us, trying to determine how much of a threat we were. Long kept his gun trained on it, hands shaking violently. I knew he was going to shoot again, and hoping not to anger this thing, I grabbed his arm, trying to force his gun down. He jumped the moment that I touched him, giving me a hysterical look. Don't. I snapped. You're just going to piss it off. The spider took a step toward us, hissing as it did. Long pulled away from me. I tried calling his name, but Long had already made his choice, and it sealed his fate. He'd opted to fight this thing. And so, like the fool he was, he shot at it again. The spider lunged for us. I ran. Long didn't. He only had enough time to scream before it pounced on him. And then, all I could hear were the dying screams in his throat as he was pulled apart. I didn't see him die, but I didn't need to. I heard everything. I kept running, not even thinking about where the approach channel was going to end. And when it did end, all I could do was plummet into the darkness. See, at the end of an approach channel is what is appropriately called a drop shaft. It's where the water flows into a larger tunnel beneath the city. That tunnel flows into the water treatment plant. And the water down there. Yeah, let's just say that you don't want to end up in the water down there. And unfortunately, that was exactly where I was going. I know that every job has its struggles, but I didn't expect to need to choose between diving into raw sewage and fighting a giant spider monster when I woke up that morning. However, the choice was presented to me, and I did the best that I could given the circumstances. Going into the wastewater was exactly as unpleasant as you'd think it'd be. I'm implying not to share the details simply because I genuinely do not want to remember them, and I'm still not entirely convinced that dealing with a giant angry spider person wasn't the better choice. A small comfort was that the pain of hitting the water, combined with the confusing sensation of being flushed through a pipe and into an even larger pipe, made the whole experience slightly less disgusting at the cost of being more painful. At the end of it, I was washed out into the main pipe and collapsed into the water, covered in filth and gagging from the stench that had sunk into my every pore. I felt disoriented and confused. I tried to stand, only to collapse back into the wastewater before aimlessly looking around, hoping that maybe I could figure out what direction to go in. It was too dark to see much of anything, and I'd lost my flashlight during my trip through the wastewater, so I was just left to wander aimlessly, following what I thought was the flow of the water. As my eyes slowly started to acclimate to the darkness, I could feel shapes in the water. Some of them I almost tripped over, and I could smell rotting meat on top of the stink of human waste. In the darkness, I could make out shapes in the water and hear the buzzing of bugs around me. I could even feel a few whiz past my head, and I mindlessly swatted at them. Old bones crunched under my boots, and I quietly thanked whatever God was listening that I couldn't see what they belonged to. I wanted to assume they were animal bones, but who knew, right? I couldn't shake the mental image of myself unknowingly stepping over the mauled corpse of Stuart Long, although that was more from the trauma of having recently witnessed a man die than any guilt over what had happened to him. Long had quite literally gotten himself killed, although I was terrified that I'd be joining him at any second. I kept listening in, half expecting to hear spider legs creeping up behind me, but it was impossible to tell if I was alone or not in that darkness, and with the bugs buzzing past me. If there were anything after me, I truly would not know it until after it had pounced. Still, I knew I couldn't afford to let the fear get the better of me, so I just kept walking, hoping that maybe if I did, I'd somehow find myself at the water treatment plant, and maybe then I'd get some help. Maybe. As I pressed on, I noticed a light ahead of me, and I picked up the pace, hoping to God that I'd finally found my way out of this mess. But as I drew closer, I became very aware that whatever the source of that light was, it was not from the water treatment plant. In fact, I wasn't entirely sure what it was. My first thought was that it was a fatberg, which is a solid mass of waste matter formed by an unholy mixture of wet wipes, grease, oil, and every other piece of garbage people tend to flush down their toilets. But the longer I looked, the less certain I was about that. Fatbergs usually didn't have lamps embedded in them. Fatbergs usually didn't have thick spider webs clinging to them. And fatbergs didn't usually lead into a separate tunnel into the earth large enough for me to walk through. Oh, and yeah, fatbergs didn't usually have dead deer protruding from them, let alone dead deer with other bugs living in them. God, the sight of those corpses, the way the bugs crawled through the rotting flesh and exposed bone, the empty, hollow eyes. It was almost too horrible to look at. And I swore that I could see things inside the corpses, honeycombs of some sort, and the bugs who crawled around them looked almost like bees. Was something cultivating some kind of bee in these things? I thought back to Troy's rules. Rule number 4. If you find a body, and odds are you will find a body, don't touch it. Don't try to move it. Hell, don't even get close to it. And don't waste the supervisor's time reporting it. The only time the bodies get reported is when they're human. Suddenly, that made a little more sense. If those spider things were cultivating something in these bodies, of course we shouldn't touch them. And if they were cultivating their food in the sewer, I paused before staring down into the tunnel by the corpses. Dull lamps illuminated it as it wound down into the earth, and I could see several pale centipede things that looked a lot like the creature that Long had shot to get us into this mess. These things must have belonged to the spiders too, although whether they were some sort of guard dog or another thing the spiders were farming was hard to say. I took a step away from the tunnel before looking back to make sure that I was alone. And that was when I heard the slow rustle of movement. I paused, feeling a chill run through me as the imminent reality of my own death dawned on me. Slowly I turned, just in time to see a dark shape descending from the ceiling. A fresh set of eyes settled on me, narrowing as they studied me. I put my hands up, hoping that it might understand the gesture of surrender, and slowly it drew closer to me. I wasn't sure if it was curious or looking to murder me, and at that point, I don't think it really mattered. I wish I could say that I faced my death with dignity, but I'm going to be honest, I didn't. I sat there, praying to whatever God would listen that it wouldn't kill me. And then I heard a voice. Leave that one. He's with me. Troy? I saw a figure emerge from the tunnel in the wall, and against all logic, somehow it was Troy. He had a hell of a goose egg on his head from where he'd been hit earlier. But he was alive. He stepped between me and the spider person, arms outstretched. With me. He repeated firmly. The spiders stared down at him before huffing and turning away. I watched as they disappeared down the nearby tunnel, and Troy watched them go before quietly turning to me. Good Lord, boy, I'm shocked to see you're still alive. What just happened? It was the only thing I could stammer. Can you talk to them? Some of them. I've been down here for long enough that they know me. They know I'm not a threat, but they ain't too happy with us right now. So what you're gonna do is get up, follow me, and I'm gonna get you out of here. How do you know they'll even let us leave? I asked. Troy's expression soured. Had to pay them off, he admitted. Let them keep what was left of your friend. They considered it a fair trade so long as we leave. Now let's go. I didn't ask any more questions. After I made it out of the sewers that day, I ended up in a hospital alongside Peter. I had some minor cuts and bruises, a burning rash over most of my body from all the sewage I'd been crawling around in. But I was still alive, and I figured that had to count for something. Nobody said a word about what happened to Stuart long down in the sewer. He got written off as a workplace accident, and they never even tried to recover his body. I suspect what's left of him is still down in the sewers, even now, feeding whatever it is that those things down there are cultivating. Although I've never seen the body myself. Yes, I've been back down beneath the southeast side of town. The next time they needed someone to go, they sent me and Tomas along with Troy, Craig, and Peter. We know what's down there, and we know how to deal with them after all. My second visit to those sewers was a lot less eventful, and most of my subsequent visits haven't been all that eventful either. Over the years, I've gotten better at dealing with the spiders. They're not the most friendly folk, and I know all too well that if you cross them, they'll rip your guts out before you even realize that you're dead. But so long as you follow the rules and leave them alone, they're content to live and let live. They can even be reasonable. To an extent. We've had a few small incidents over the years, but nothing like the one that Long caused. Odds are, when Troy and Craig retire next year, Tomas and I will be training the next group on what to do when you're down beneath the southeast side of town. So in preparation for that, I made a point to keep a copy of Tom's rules in the pump house. I also keep a picture of Stuart Long in there. Not as a memorial and not out of spite either. Just as a grim reminder of what can happen when you don't follow the rules. Don't go to Disney if you can't follow the rules. My brother died at Disney about 40 years ago. Well, technically. It was at River Country. Not many people have heard about it, but it was the first water park Disney ever built way back in the day. Opened in '76. It was supposed to be this big thing, a slice of old-timey swimming holes mixed with that Disney magic. People loved it, at least at first. It wasn't as fancy as the other parks, but that just made it feel more real. Like the magic was closer to home. It had these cool rock slides, pools with sandy bottoms, and this huge man-made lagoon. They even had a tire swing over the water. It's like Disney plucked out the image of the perfect lakeside vacation straight out of your head. But then stuff started happening. Mostly around the staff getting involved in weird accidents. Didn't make the news much. Disney's good at keeping things quiet. But they couldn't keep the stories from reaching the nearby towns. Let's just say it wasn't unusual to see a Disney cast member in the ER in those days. Still, people loved River Country. And then people started dying. A lot of the details around their deaths were kept out of the press. They said it was out of respect to the grieving families. Sure. And I'm sure the NDAs were part of Disney being respectful. Things calmed down after a while. But the accidents continued to pile up. Getting assigned to work at River Country, It became like a prison sentence. Disney eventually did close down the park. They said there wasn't enough demand for it to stay open. That I can believe. Staff injuries were fine, as long as the place was still making money, apparently. So now it's just been sitting there all this time, just rotting away. People forgot about it. Or they tried to. But you know how stories are. They don't ever really die. Rumors started cropping up about why it was really closed. Some said it was the water. Others thought it was cursed. Haunted by the dead. Disney tried to bury it. Cover up all traces like it never existed. They put up fences, big ones, with padlocks and no trespassing signs all over. The mouse tried to make everyone forget. Like it never happened. But how could I forget my own brother? Tommy was just a kid, man. 10 years old. And he always had that look in his eyes like everything was an adventure. And then one day, he just wasn't there anymore. That summer, we went to River Country. It was a big deal for us. My folks didn't make a ton of money. Vacations, they were like finding a 20 in an old pair of jeans, rare and exciting. So when they told us we were going to Disney World, Tommy and I, we lost our minds. We were bouncing off the walls, counting down days like it was the lead up to Christmas. We didn't even care that it was just at River Country. Growing up near Disney World in Florida and being too poor to go, it always felt like a bad joke as a kid. I remember packing into our old station wagon. Everything crammed in so tight you couldn't see out the back window. The drive felt like forever. Me and Tommy made up games to pass the time. My spy got old fast, so we invented stories about the stuff we do at River Country. When we finally got there, it was like stepping into another world. The place had this vibe. We couldn't get our swim trunks on fast enough. That day, man, it was perfect. The sun was shining, the water was cool, and those slides were something else. Tommy, who's fearless, always a couple steps ahead, daring me to follow him on the biggest slides. And he did, every time. Our parents were happy to stay by the picnic tables, just to watch us having the time of our lives. Mom had this smile the whole day. Dad tried to act all cool and collected. But even he couldn't resist trying out the tire swing. It was like we were a perfect picture family, complete with pets. Yeah, so apparently Disney liked to keep a few cats around for pest control, the staff explained. And we'd never had pets before, so getting to pet as many as I want was like the perfect cherry on top. We stayed until they practically had to kick us out. It was one of those golden memories, Everything felt right in the world. And then be the last time we'd all be together, happy like that. After what happened to Tommy, things, well, they just weren't the same. After that trip to River Country, something changed in my little brother. He got sick, but not like any cold or flu we'd ever seen. He was always thirsty, drinking water like it was going out of style. And he wouldn't stop talking about swimming, about going back to River Country, about how the water felt. It started slow. At first, it was just him being more tired than usual. But then the thirst kicked in. He'd drink glass after glass of water, and it was never enough. You'd find him at night, just standing over the sink. He'd be gulping it down like he'd never seen water before. It was odd watching him. He'd always been the feisty one, always moving, always laughing. But as the days went by, he grew quieter. And then he started to avoid food, only wanting water. It didn't matter what we did, nothing worked. His eyes grew sunken and desperate. And after a few days, his body just started wasting away. It was heartbreaking seeing him like that. Mom and Dad took him to doctors, lots of them. But they all just scratched their heads. They ran tests, asked questions, gave him a bunch of drugs, even hooked him up to a feeding tube. But Tommy just kept getting skinnier, paler. It was like he was fading away right in front of us, and no one could figure out why. The only thing that could perk him up was water. Medical bills started piling up fast. I had to grow up a lot quicker than I would have. And we eventually had to take Tommy home. The night he disappeared, it was like any other Tuesday, though we all went to bed like usual. But Mom, she was really worried about my brother. She barely got any sleep because she'd check on him throughout the night. It was during one of these rounds that she found Tommy's bed empty. His Donald Duck curtains tore away from the open window. Panic set in fast. I woke up to the sound of Mom crying into the phone as she dialed 911. Police showed up immediately and put out an alert. Mom and Dad went around town calling for Tommy. They knocked on people's doors, called other people's parents, and checked for any place a 10-year-old might head to. At that point, they didn't want to think about the possibility that Tommy was taken. They were still holding on to the hope that maybe he just ran away. And then as dawn broke, we got a call from the police. They found Tommy's sweater. It was by one of the pools at River Country. It was torn up and covered in cat hair. It seemed like one of the local cats was using it as a blanket. But that was all they found. Everyone was baffled. How did such a sick kid manage to walk that far on his own? And the park was locked up for the night. Yet somehow Tommy got in. It didn't make any sense. But the police said that Disney was willing to help, that they'd let the police bring in search parties, as long as they didn't hurt any of the cats that live in a park. Cops and volunteers combed the place until sundown. My parents had to be dragged out when the place had to close for the night. And this went on for a week. They even spread out to the woods around River Country. They never found any other trace of Tommy. No other sign that he was even at the park at all. It was like he just vanished. Some men in suits came up after that. They offered my parents a deal to just keep this whole thing quiet. And my parents were furious. Everything started going wrong after our trip. And they blamed it all on Disney. There must have been something in the water that made Tommy sick. But we had no choice. We were drowning in debt by then. And my parents needed the hush money. It tore us apart, losing Tommy like that and being forced to keep quiet about it. My family never really moved on from it. We were always tense around each other after that. We later found out Tommy wasn't the only death linked to River Country. There were other kids who also died under mysterious circumstances. People started whispering about some brain-eating amoeba in the water. In Disney, they latched onto that story like a lifeline, blaming everything on it. So fast forward a bunch of years, and life's taken me places I never thought I'd go. Ended up working for a security firm. It's your standard rent-a-cop place. Not glamorous, but it paid enough for someone to only get a high school diploma. And then one day I got this job order. It was paying way above our usual rate. That was because it was a job from the Big Mouse himself. Disney wanted a night watchman. And guess where? Yep, River Country. Their current guy was retiring, and they needed a replacement. Despite the generous offer, nobody really wanted the job. Any facilities the resort had were long gone. That means no electricity, no running water, and no cozy employee lounge. Any watchman would have to set up a makeshift camp on site and bring lots of bug spray. The job order included a massive budget to cover any supplies we'd need. Enough for a decent-sized tent, a generator, a stove, and as much food and water as we could carry. The company would be happy to reimburse us anything else we'd need. And I was the only one willing to take this job. My dad had just had a stroke. I needed the money to cover bills. And besides, I figured it might give me some closure. I don't know if I confronted the place that took my brother. Maybe I could finally let go of the anger, of the guilt. As soon as I volunteered, my boss gave me the job packet, along with the old watchman's contact details. He was a guy named Robert, and he's retiring after being on the job for 12 years. I texted the number and was told to show up to this diner downtown for my training. Robert was this tall, thin dude with wrinkles. You could tell he'd seen some stuff. He drank coffee like his life depended on it. "Jed," he said, handing me a beat-up flashlight. "Keeping people out of there, it's more important than you think. Especially when it gets dark." And then he pulled out a map of the place. It was old and worn, with notes written all over it. In the bottom right corner was a list of rules. Do not talk to Mickey. He pointed to an X by the entrance. Might sound funny, but trust me on this, it's bad luck, son. I nodded. Every gig has its superstitions. You don't question them if you want to get along with the people you're working with. Rule number 2, remove any tools you see lying around. He glanced around, like the ground might sprout a hammer or something. Tools left out can cause problems, he said. He told me that as soon as I see any during my rounds, I should take it out of the resort. He left me a toolbox with a heavy-duty padlock on the job site. I was to take any tools and dump them in there. Make sure you don't ever leave that box unlocked, Jet. This is all to keep you safe, all right? He explained. Rule number 3, do not cross the river. Try not to even look at it. Nothing good comes from paying it any mind. Now I know I haven't been to the place since I was a kid, but I don't think there was actually a river in the park. Robert must have seen the confusion on my face, because he gave me this look that told me I shouldn't even bring it up. I mean this one, Jet. You'll know it when you see it. He said with finality, before moving to the last rule. And rule number 4, when you get lost, follow the cats. Okay, so that one caught me off guard. Those cats know this place better than anyone, he continued. Before I could really process that, Robert clapped me on the shoulder a bit too hard. All right, well, stick to these and you'll be all right, he said before leaving me. Well, like I said, every job's different. Being a night guard's a pretty boring job, honestly. I suppose these rules Robert had were more about making him feel like he's actually doing something. I spent the rest of the day packing up for my first shift. A bot, a tent, lots of water, some flare guns, a sleeping bag. They'd said that they'd leave a boat for me at the dock. It felt kind of weird heading to a job on a boat, but okay. The ride over was calm, just me and the sound of the water. When I landed, it was straight into the wilderness. The path to river country was choked with weeds and vines, like I was the first person to walk through in ages. Finally, I hit the entrance. Man, it was a mess. The sign that used to welcome everyone was so faded, you could barely tell what it was. It just hung there, looking tired and beaten. The little buildings and booths near the entrance were all falling apart. Roofs caved in, wood rotted through. Everything was covered in a layer of grime and moss. And there was this weird mix of smells. Rust, mold, and a faint hint of chlorine. I set up my camp right near the entrance. Seemed like a good spot, close enough to see if anyone tried to sneak in. The sun was getting low by the time I finished. I figured I should make my first round of the park while it was still light enough to see. Near the entrance was this old statue of Mickey Mouse. He had a wide, welcoming smile, his arms reaching towards the resort. But man, time had not been kind to Mickey. The paint on him was peeling off in big chunks, showing the gray beneath. Parts of him were just crumbling away, like he was slowly turning to dust. A huge black cat was asleep by his feet. Well, I pulled out the map Rob gave me, trying to get a sense where to head first. And that's when I noticed something odd. According to the map, Mickey's statue was supposed to be on the other side of the entrance. I glanced back at the statue, then down at the map again. Well, that's weird. But I shrugged it off. I was getting a pretty good idea of why Rob had to retire. I gave the statue a pat on its head, expecting it to fall apart under my hand. It felt cold and slightly damp. The cat's tail twitched in its sleep, and I bent down to pet it. Hey there, buddy. Keep an eye on things for me, will ya? I said. I briefly wondered if that counted as breaking the first rule. If Disney had some sort of camera system to check, I'd say I was talking to the cat. I walked around, and the map Rob gave me wasn't adding up. He'd marked spots where certain structures should be, but they either weren't there, or they were completely different from what the map said. The whole park was a mess. Everywhere I looked, things were rotting or crumbling away. The place was overgrown with weeds and bushes that were almost as tall as I am. Thick carpets of leaves and vines covered the ground. The pools were crawling with mold, and they smelled awful. And there were a lot more Mickey Mouse statues around here than I remembered. It wasn't just the one at the entrance. There were a ton of them just scattered around, all in different poses and costumes. Here and there, I'd see cats. And as I moved deeper into the park, I kept hearing this grinding sound, like concrete scraping against something. These buildings were falling apart all around me. I couldn't help but think about all the safety violations this job was putting me through. So much for OSHA standards. And that's when I saw it. Right there in the middle of the path, a screwdriver. But not just any screwdriver. This one looked shiny and new. I remembered Rob's second rule, and I stopped. Okay, why was there a brand new screwdriver just sitting here? It almost seemed like it was left there on purpose. I picked it up, feeling its weight in my hand. I turn around to make my way back to the entrance. This must be some sort of test to see if I could follow instructions, right? They'll probably check the toolbox after my shift to see I did it. As I walked back, those grinding noises kept up, surrounding me. The whole place was going to fall apart right before my eyes. But deep down, a part of me wasn't so sure that was it. It all sounded too deliberate. When I finally got back to the entrance, that's when I noticed something really weird. Mickey, the statue, it wasn't like how I remembered. Before, he was looking out to the path, ready to welcome kids into the park. But now he was turned towards the gate, like he was waiting for me to come back out. My heart jumped. There must have been someone else here. Hazing, training, whatever they want to call it. That was it. That had to be it. I quickly locked up the screwdriver in Rob's toolbox. I decided to play by their rules. I heard how controlling Disney can be with their staff, all to keep the magic alive. They wanted people who can follow rules, even if they didn't make a lot of sense. I figured it was just some sort of test. But just when I calmed down, I heard a noise that made me look back over my shoulder. It came from inside the park. It was getting real dark now, but I could see something shining in the distance. I walked closer, and I saw a hammer. Shiny and new, like the screwdriver from earlier. The hammer was by the feet of another Mickey statue, as if it had dropped it. And then off to the side, I could just make out footsteps that sounded like they were running away from me. There was someone else in here. Maybe some kid looking for a thrill, or someone wanting to take a piece of the park home. Or, I don't know, it could all just be part of the test. Feeling a bit more like I had a real job to do, I followed the sound. "Hey," I called out. "You're not supposed to be in here." It was fully dark now. I had to use my flashlight to get around. One wrong move and I could step on a rusty nail or fall into an empty pool. Every now and then, I'd catch the sound of footsteps, just out of reach. It was like playing a game of tag with a ghost. I was deep into river country now. More trees started blocking my way. At this point, it felt more like a forest than a family resort. And every now and then, I'd spot a Mickey Mouse statue. They were everywhere. In the middle of paths, clustered around trees, lined up in rows. Dozens of them. But they weren't the regular kind of Mickey statues you'd find in the bigger parks. No, these things were weird. Arms too long, joints bent at odd angles, sunken eyes. The deeper I went, the more Mickeys I found. Some of them really didn't belong in a water park. One had a torn-up Santa outfit draped over it. Another was painted all wrong, its colors looking like a photo-negative version of Mickey. But the one that really stopped me in my tracks was this Mickey dressed like he was ready for a safari. He was holding a machete that looked way too real for comfort. And all of them still had that iconic Disney grin. I wondered if Disney was using this place as some sort of dumping ground. Some of these had to be rejected. There was even one that didn't have a head. And the whole time, those footsteps kept going on, with the occasional laugh floating back to me. Well, I'm glad this intruder was having a great time leading me around. I could hear heavy breathing now, too. Whoever it was must be getting tired. But no matter how much I ran, the figure was always just outside my flashlight. Meanwhile, the statues I passed by got stranger. They were of all shapes and sizes now. One was Mickey dressed as a clown. Its makeup was smeared, and in its hand was a balloon. But instead of floating, it just sagged to the ground. Another was a really fat one, not in a cute, chubby way. Instead, its stomach bulged out across a path. Its face was bloated and blue. Veins ran all over it, straining against its bulk. It looked like a drowning victim. I knew it was made of nothing but cement, but man, the way its flesh folded and stretched, it looked disturbingly realistic. I wondered who the hell would make something like that out of concrete. And then I heard it, the sound of rushing water. I brushed past some weeds to see an actual river flowing right there in the middle of the park. Some benches lay broken by the bank. Now, despite the name, River Country wasn't supposed to have any rivers, just pools and slides, and there weren't any rivers near this place. Or at least there weren't supposed to be. I fished out Rob's map. I looked closer and I saw a little squiggly line in the middle of the park. Rob left a note next to it that said, "River starts here." I brushed it off earlier, thinking he was just being poetic or something. But the old geezer wasn't joking. And there, right by the riverbank, stood another one of those weird Mickey Mouse statues. But this one caught my eye for another reason. Its smile was the same bright, happy one as all the rest. One of his hands was raised up, balled into a fist, and in its gloved hand was the hammer I forgot to pick up earlier. And that's what actually broke me. Because this wasn't a themed statue. It didn't make any sense for a regular Mickey to be holding something like that. That's it, I'm out. Rob would have to cancel his retirement. I backed away slowly. I turned my head, and that's when I felt something brush against me, and I heard a high-pitched whisper in my ear. Panic took over. I broke into a full sprint, desperate to get out of this place. The bushes and vines seemed to have grown thicker. They tangled around my legs. They almost tripped me a few times. And the Mickeys, they were everywhere now, even more than before. Some were even up in the trees, like they were waiting to jump on me. I almost ran into a few of them. And this whole time, I kept hearing the grinding noises. They surrounded me from all directions. But no matter which way I turned or how fast I ran, I kept finding myself back at the river's edge. The park shouldn't be this big. I pulled out the map again, hoping Rob left me a clue. The landscape around me looked all wrong. Nothing matched up. I looked back down at the note about the river. I followed the squiggly line until I saw another note Rob made. Just downstream was a place he'd marked as the cat den. I don't know what that meant, but the last rule flashed in my mind. When you get lost, follow the cats. Funny choice of words there. You know, when I get lost, not if. Looks like I don't have a choice. I ran along the river, making sure to keep my distance. I couldn't see where the Mickey with the hammer was, but there were more of them now, standing on the other bank. The grinding sound was much louder. I couldn't take my eyes off the path for too long, but every time I looked to the side, I'd see more and more Mickeys coming out of the trees. I never saw them move, but every time I looked back, they seemed to have moved closer to the river's edge. I ran faster until I saw a flash of red in the water. I almost tripped at what I saw. Some of them were in the river now. Their necks were all twisted to look at me. Their eyes had a lifelike shine to them now. Behind me, the grinding concrete noises grew louder, closing in on me fast. I was almost out of breath. They're playing with me, I thought. My chest was on fire, and that's when I heard a sharp screech. In front of me was a gray tabby cat, fur all puffed out, looking like it was ready to take on the world. It was hissing not at me, but at what's behind me. Another cat, a white one, darted out from the bushes. It leaped at something behind my back. I heard a wet tearing sound and a loud thud as something heavy fell to the ground. I didn't have the guts to turn around and see what it was. More cats had appeared now, hissing and surging around me. More heavy thuds sounded from behind me. I fell to my knees, trying to catch my breath. And that's when I saw the orange cat. It was sitting calmly on a fallen log, its tail swishing slowly from side to side. I didn't know what else to do. "You know a way out, bud?" I asked. The cat twitched its nose at me before jumping into the brush. It kept its tail up, like a beacon for me to follow. So that's what I did. Every now and then, it would glance back at me, as if to make sure I was still there. Its bright fur stood out against the dark. Behind me, I could hear the other cats hissing and crying out, and I couldn't hear the grinding noises anymore. My guide picked up the pace, darting through the weeds. I did my best to keep up. Every time it looked back at me, it felt like a silent promise that I wasn't alone in this. And that tiny bit of hope kept me moving, even when my lungs burned and my legs ached. Slowly, things started to look more familiar. The sound of the river faded away, and the thick bushes and vines thinned out. The ground evened out. Finally, we broke free from the dense growth. I was now standing in the middle of the park. No creepy Mickey statues anywhere. A weak sunlight was just breaking over the water. The cat slowed down, and I could see the entrance gate in the distance. I let out a breath and I glanced back. Behind me was just open space. A couple of old, rotting picnic tables scattered around. No sign of the forest, the river, or any Mickeys. The orange cat started circling around my legs, purring and rubbing against me. I reached down to pet its soft fur. It was nice having something make sense again. Something warm and safe. I picked him up before heading for the gates. The sky was getting lighter now, which made it easier to see that the statue by the entrance was gone. The one that started it all. I'm going to have to give Robert a call once I'm out of this place. But for now, I had a favor to return. I got back to my tent, settled in, and I tore off a huge chunk of my tuna fish sandwich. The cat purred and snuggled up close, making itself comfortable as it ate. And that's when I saw something I hadn't noticed before. It had a collar around its neck with a name tag. I reached down and looked. The cat's name was Tommy. I work at a remote drilling site for a company up north. It's not classified per se, but due to some interaction with environmental wingnuts and some very strict privacy guidelines, we don't exactly advertise its location or the reasons we drill. Let's just say it's somewhere pretty cold and semi-desolate, and it sucks so much that they pay guys like me a shitload of money to sit out there for months during the off-season, babysitting the drills and processing equipment. I basically take readings, keep things from breaking, and release pressure from our waste storage tanks on a set schedule to avoid any incidents. A couple months ago, there was a leak in the bunkhouse roof, and the subsequent water seepage damaged a sizable portion of the walls. While removing a section of wet drywall, I found an old technical logbook containing quite the story, written 30 years ago in journal format. I won't bother giving you a synopsis because you very likely will find it as curious, fascinating, and at times horrific as I have. I'm calling it Return to the Dark and would love to read your thoughts and comments. Enjoy. Jack's Log, November 21st, 1990. 3 days ago, I was dropped off here at the drilling site via amphibious plane, landing on the lake just like in the movies. My monitoring partner, Vladislav, walked into the control center this afternoon, direct from Ukraine. Loud and crass, he's exactly the kind of guy you would expect to be out in the wilderness for long periods of time. Not exactly the kind of guy who does social situations very well. He said he prefers I call him Vlad. You know, like the Impaler. He's a retired deep earth isolation miner, which is an incredibly dangerous profession, requiring a certain amount of nuttiness to even begin to seriously consider getting into. Not many DI miners make it to retirement. They either get out early after a scare, have a mental breakdown, or die young in a desolate hole somewhere. The body is rarely accessible to be brought back to the surface. If you're asking yourself what a DI miner does, you probably don't want to know. To put it simply though, once a mine has reached an unsafe depth for equipment and traditional human crews, these guys continue. Alone, operating small excavators and even hand tools. 4 days or even weeks at a time without seeing sunlight. According to Vlad, there are some incredibly valuable things at depths where most people can't conceive a human being could survive. Random note here, although he's shredded with muscle, Vlad is an extremely small man. I dare not ask him, but I doubt he's more than 5 feet tall. He has enormous hands and feet for a guy of his height. He's quite pale too. November 25th, 1990. Vlad and I have been getting the lay of the land here at the site. As I believe I said in my last entry, I arrived a few days before he showed up, and in that time I familiarized myself with the ins and outs of the job. The work isn't too tough, and we have a surprisingly user-friendly manual for all the tests and checks and things we're doing here. Vlad is chock full of insane stories from his mining days. Today was the saga of the time he caved himself in and was trapped for 5 days. Subsisting on no food and only 20 ounces of water, he eventually managed to dig his way back out and contact the surface. There are no rescue parties in his line of work, and they were 24 hours from writing him off and sealing up the mine. November 30th, 1990. Vlad disappeared 2 days ago. I've searched everywhere within a couple-mile radius, and I have no idea what to do. I called headquarters, but we're in the middle of a pretty bad storm, and the company can't get out here to help for at least a week. December 4th, 1990. Vlad walked back onto the pending rescue operation. December 5th, 1990. Vlad has been up and moving around, tending to some of the lighter duty job sites a few hours ago. He barely said a word. He looked to be in good health, so I called off the pending rescue operation stuff. He still hasn't said where he was for 4 days, and I'm trying not to badger him about it. He's mostly back to his old self, though, laughing and joking. He's been acting a little weird at times. Last night I woke up to pee, and his bunk was empty. After 15 minutes of searching, I spotted him about 100 yards out, standing near one of the pressure tanks. He was just staring at the ground, displaying no discernible acknowledgement of my shouts. He didn't snap out of it until I got all the way there and gave him a light touch on the shoulder. He looked a little confused, then cracked a joke and said he must have been sleepwalking. December 6th, 1990. Vlad was back out by the tank again last night, but this time I saw him leave the bunkhouse, so I followed. He didn't initially respond to my touch this time because he was zoned out, muttering something in Ukrainian. It sounded like Yero Zumio. I told him about it this morning, and he didn't recognize my pronunciation and said he didn't recall any of last night to even give me a guess. I'm from West Virginia. My pronunciation of everything is kind of a mess by default, so I'm probably just not saying it correctly. Vlad is surprisingly flippant about this whole situation. He doesn't seem to comprehend how scary it is to be out in the middle of the wilderness at night, alone, watching a man you barely know staring at the ground like a zombie and speaking a language you don't understand. I'm expecting too much out of a guy who spent 25 years living in mostly complete isolation and hand-dug holes. I doubt there's anything this guy is scared of. I would just let him do his thing, but I'm afraid he'll walk off into the woods again and not return. December 8th, 1990. Vlad didn't leave his bunk last night. I'm very happy about that because he's really creeping me the hell out with this behavior. I have nothing else significant to report other than that he's been complaining of a headache all day and even took a couple breaks to lie down. December 10th, 1990. Vlad's headache has worsened. If he doesn't improve soon, I want to call headquarters again. I don't know if the surrounding storms will ever let up, but I should at least notify them of a pending medical emergency. December 13th, 1990. Okay, shit really hit the fan today. I was chilling in the bunkhouse watching a rerun of Family Ties when I heard a huge thud sound, not an explosion per se. It was more the sound it makes when you drop a sandbag or something, only amplified by 1,000 times. The whole building vibrated enough to knock my bottle of Clearly Canadian off the table. I ran to check it out and saw the bottom end of tank number 9 had blown out. Apparently, Vlad hasn't performed the pressure release sequence for several days. Thank God it didn't blow out the top, or we would have a major problem. As it stands right now, it just blew out a ton of earth from below the surface. There's dirt all over the entire 2 acres of equipment we have here, and the ground has been exposed in an area about 50 feet in diameter and 8 feet deep. This is crazy, and not surprisingly, Vlad doesn't seem concerned. That tank, the equipment it damaged, and rebuilding efforts will probably cost $250,000. December 14th, 1990. I notified headquarters of the incident. They still can't get anyone out here, but since everything is safe now, they said to carry on. I covered for Vlad by telling them there was a malfunction. December 15th, 1990. Things just got way more interesting out here. Vlad zombied out of the bunkhouse again last night. It's the first time since before the explosion. I followed as usual and watched from a distance as he got a shovel and climbed down into the crater created by the explosion. Vlad kneeled down, put his hands slightly above the soil, and moved it around for a few minutes. It was almost like he was feeling for a hot spot. He finally stopped, grabbed his shovel, and spent a few minutes clearing earth until I heard the unmistakable sound of metal on metal. He had hit something. Vlad continued shoveling around the area, making a nice clearing several feet wide, then brushed some dirt off the ground. He knelt down, took a look, stood up, and brushed himself off. Nodding, he said something that sounded like, "Atro medi yo-yo du bumo." I had a notepad with me this time, so I could make sure to get it. After that, he picked up the shovel and headed back to the bunkhouse. I stayed out of sight, and when Vlad shut the bunkhouse door, I jumped into the pit and ran to take a look at what he had hit with that shovel. It was a metal cover similar to a manhole, but it was square and made of thick, hand-hammered iron. It was dimpled. The surface was warped looking, almost like ocean waves in a sculpture. I had to dust it off a bit more, but I could finally see some crude markings. Across the very bottom was some sort of written language I didn't recognize. It didn't look like anything European I'd ever seen. Then going across the entire cover in an X pattern was etching that resembled chains. In each section created by the chains was an image, a four-pointed star, a pickaxe, diamond, a St. Andrew's cross that those X things people were crucified on, with a human figure on it. Obviously, I had no idea what it meant. Since I had already received my nightly scare, I quietly made my way back to the bunkhouse and into bed, without waking Vlad. I don't know what to think right now. I really don't like where things are going, but I keep reminding myself that Vlad was a die miner. He's not a normal person by any definition. He's the kind of guy you don't want to see walking toward you on the sidewalk at night, but definitely the guy you want walking with you on the sidewalk at night, if that makes sense. December 16th, 1990. There was certainly a little pep in my step this morning. Since it was light outside, I was feeling more brave and excitedly told Vlad about the previous night's events. He was perplexed, but excited. I showed him my notepad with the words he'd said, and after pronouncing my version of it a few times, he decided it meant get his help. We had to get our routines taken care of before goofing off, so we ran from spot to spot and got everything squared away until the midday rechecks. Vlad was getting more excited by the minute. A retired miner uncovered a mysterious lid to what was most assuredly some sort of underground bunker. Shit, yeah, he's pumped about it. After having a look at the lid, it was most certainly going to be a two-man job, which I presume is why he'd said, get his help in his sleep out there. We made our way to the tool shed and brought back a sledgehammer, a couple crowbars, one of those huge steel pry bars you can hammer on the end of. I don't know the name of it, but the damn thing is about 5 feet long and weighs at least 20 pounds. We worked hard for hours to make progress on that cover. It was seized up pretty tight with crud in the seams and all. It had clearly been covered up for a long time. We were down to using small chisels just to break loose the gunk around the outside. We finally managed to wedge it open and lay it upright next to the side of the hole just before dark. That lid must have weighed the better part of 300 pounds. We were both exhausted and had neglected our normal duties, so we quickly hit our routines again and called it a day. December 21st, 1990. A huge storm hit the morning after we got the lid open. We're sitting in about 3 feet of snow at the moment, so we've left the hole alone. Vlad is chomping at the bit, but the guy knows a thing or two about safety and not rushing into things he knows nothing about. So we wait. December 22nd, 1990. Nothing else has happened, but I just feel the need to note in this log that Vlad's whole demeanor has changed. He's his old self again. Now that I see him in his normal state and compare him to the guy who was sleepwalking and acting creepy as hell, I can see it's like that pressure tank he destroyed was symbolic of how he was feeling inside, despite him disappearing for those few days. December 25th, 1990. I'm pretty tired of trudging through the snow to do our routines and not getting to check out that hole, but Vlad insists that we wait. The snow should be gone in a few days, and it can't come fast enough. I'm sick of playing cards and smelling Vlad's farts. Beans never should have been a part of our supply drops. It's Christmas, so we broke out some canned cranberry sauce to eat along with some frostbitten turkey we found in the deep freezer. Vlad got drunk and sang some Christmas carols in his native tongue. It's funny how those Eastern Europeans can make anything sound like a drinking song. December 28th, 1990. Finally, we checked out the hole, and holy shit, life just got a lot more interesting. Wow. So Vlad and I took some lights and a bit of rope and headed over to the hole for a quick inspection. He went first, putting his arm inside and head just below the rim. He whooped with excitement, popped up and told me it wasn't any kind of chamber, but was in fact a hole and had a ladder. So now we were both pretty pumped about this. We really didn't even bother discussing it anymore. Instead, we just grabbed our shit and got ready to enter. Vlad went first, of course. Man, it was really dark in there. I was told once on a tour that a closed cave is the darkest place you can be, and this might as well have been a cave. Yes, the lid wasn't on there, but it sure didn't feel like any light was getting in. We slowly made our way down the ladder, which in and of itself was a masterpiece of handiwork. It was cut directly out of stone, but perfect in every way. Smooth, narrow rungs just like a ladder you'd see anywhere else made of steel. Vlad kept his light displayed on every step to ensure there were no damaged rungs to send us careening to our death. The hole was really narrow. I mean, hardly enough room to be able to stick out my elbows narrow, and at some points the hand-chiseled walls were so close I could feel my breath reflecting back into my face. At times, I found it difficult to fill my lungs completely because the air hung so heavy in that tight space. I'm not claustrophobic, but it was really pushing my limits. I was counting rungs and doing the math in my head, and at about 50 feet down we saw more of those markings. This time it was, I suppose, what could be called a pictograph. It was a landscape-style drawing of the moon and those same four-pointed stars along with some kind of ship or craft or something that looked like a boat maybe, but it was definitely in the air. There were dozens of stick figures drawn all along the upper portion. The pictograph made its way around the entire hole. It showed the stick figures land, then the night gave way to the sun, which cast its light unseen of them digging into snow-capped mountains with pickaxes, hollowing them out for shelter. A small but intricate network of caves were depicted, a haven for their little society. As the image progressed, people were outside hunting and gathering. Interesting for sure. We continued on for a bit, and at my estimate of 150 feet, we were parallel with a sizable room that was cut out into the rock to our left. Our lights only shined a short distance in, so Vlad took it upon himself to step off the ladder and check it out. In just a few seconds, he called out to me, and I hopped off as well and headed inside. It looked like some kind of living quarters. There were crude wooden frames with surprisingly intact fabric that was likely holding something like pine boughs or grass at some point, but it clearly dried up and disintegrated long ago. There wasn't much else in the room, only a few cups and a plate, all made of clay, but still expertly crafted like the ladder. The walls were almost completely covered in what appeared to be games. Think of something like tic-tac-toe or hangman, but these were games I didn't recognize at all. Within the games and on its own, there was quite a bit of text that neither Vlad nor I could interpret. In fact, I can't even recall it well enough to try to write it here. After finishing up in the room, Vlad, who I still found to be annoyingly cautious, said we should go back up and prepare for something more long-term. We really had no idea what we were getting into at this point, but I did protest a bit regardless. He looked up at me as if I was an idiot, pulled a few rocks he had stashed in his pocket when I wasn't looking, and dropped them. Vlad kept his fingers extended on that hand and began to count off the seconds. We never heard them hit bottom. My eyes nearly popped out of my skull. I don't know at what depth a person wouldn't be able to hear a few golf ball-sized rocks make contact, but even Vlad was surprised after 15 fingers' time. He looked up at me with a face that said, "Shut up and do what I said." And without saying a word, I gave Vlad a nod and began to ascend the ladder with haste. I was stupid to ever question a man who practically lived underground. We made our ascent, finally resurfaced, and made our way back to the bunkhouse. My legs were beat. December 30th, 1990. We didn't go back into the hole yesterday. After much discussion, we came up with a plan. We would stock up on food and water, additional light, chalk for marking depths and points of reference, and needed to find a way to perform the pressure releases automatically. Otherwise, we would only be able to go as deep as our work schedule allowed. We would get to work on making these preparations, then head back down the hole in a few days. January 5th, 1991. Even knowing of Vlad's experience underground, I hadn't quite realized the astonishing skill set he developed in order to make his descents more safe and efficient. He first came up with a simple lever system activated by the tank's own pressure to hit the valve arm once it reached a certain level. It would actually be blowing off the tank several times a day, instead of the normal 2 times. We had all the welding and fabrication supplies we needed, and he set to work getting it up and going. Secondly, Vlad decided we needed harnesses with safety lines on carabiners. We found what we needed in the shed where the tree cutters kept their gear. And on top of all this, he showed me how to build and weld together a rail system that uses rollers on the outside of the ladder so we can descend with less exertion. It uses a crank made from an altered come-along ratchet that controls the descent, and has a manual friction brake to lock the frame in place when needed. It would descend slightly less quickly than we could by foot, but we could expend very little energy by comparison. We each had a functional crank on the line, so we would be able to take turns. Giving it a trial run on one of the 30-foot tank ladders, it was working smoothly after just a few adjustments. To say Vlad was a very impressive guy wouldn't do him justice. We plan to make the trip tomorrow. January 8, 1991. What an amazing few days we've had in the tunnel. When we ventured back into the tunnel a few days ago, we were already collecting pieces of a story. The story, whether fact or fiction, appeared to be that a group of people came down to Earth from space. They were miners of some sort, and based on the room we located during our first trip down, they lived underground as they dug this tunnel. The pictograph or hieroglyphics, or whatever you call it, seems to show them digging horizontally as opposed to straight down like the tunnel we're in. We're not quite sure what to make of it all yet, but we knew there was more to see, and we're excited to get started. Vlad and I climbed manually down to the chamber we had initially discovered and made that our base camp. There we unpacked our gear and tools, and with some adjustments were able to connect Vlad's contraption to the ladder. Vlad started rotating his crank, and down we went. It was only another 25 feet or so before we reached another chamber. This one was much smaller and appeared to be a storage area for equipment. We poked around, looking through rotted wooden racks and storage bins, not finding much worth spending any time on. Then Vlad called me over to the far corner. Buried under a collapsed rack was a relatively small pickaxe and a few hand chisels. However, they didn't look like any I'd ever seen. The handles were made out of what looked and felt like wood, but it was lighter and much harder on the outside. The metal pick and chisels were a dark, almost black metal. The depth of the absence of color and sharpness of the edges gave the tools an almost sinister appearance. In addition to this, the tools had no flaws or damage, not even the slightest scratch. Vlad casually took a gentle whack at the rock wall to his left, just trying to get a feel for the pickaxe's weight distribution and balance. To both of our amazement, the pick entered the rock like it was nothing. A couple more swings from Vlad, and a chunk of rock the size of a bowling ball dropped to the floor. We both whistled in amazement. I grabbed one of the chisels, gently scraping it into the rock, and it shaved off as easily as a knife going through cheese. The precision cuts a person could make with either of these tools was astounding. With huge grins on our faces, we carefully packed up the tools and took them back up to the lodging chamber. We both knew this was something very special. We spent the rest of the first day descending the tunnel. At around 400 feet, we found another living quarters, but also made the grisly discovery of a dozen small skeletons laying on beautiful stone altars cut right out of the wall on each side, ornate with the same four-pointed stars and intricate etchings of all manner of things that must only be recognizable to someone from another planet. All I could do was marvel at their beauty. On the far wall was another pictograph. This one showed the same stick figures digging out of the mountain, but in the next scene were larger figures holding weapons, and the smaller figures were chained together at the ankles, still working the picks and shovels, piling diamonds into buckets. Some were on the ground with X's for eyes or curled in the fetal position. Others were being assaulted in various ways with the larger figures in circles around some, or lined up as if taking turns. Another figure was depicted on a St. Andrew's cross with a group of clearly distraught figures being forced to observe. Off to the side were some more of the larger figures that appear to be roasting a baby-sized figure over a fire. That last one sent a shiver up my spine. I gave Vlad a somber glance and saw he was visibly shaken as well. January 9th, 1991. Yesterday, after ascending from the burial chamber back to the first underground living quarters, we had a long discussion about what we'd found and put forth our best effort to interpret the pictographs on the walls. Because of the incredible hand tools we discovered, we agreed that whatever story the walls were telling us was probably true. I mean, we were literally hundreds of feet down a narrow shaft that had been dug out of solid rock smack dab in some of the most desolate land on the planet, where no one existed without regular supply drops. Despite the elevator system Vlad deployed, my hands and feet ached terribly. There's no stopping now, though. The descent isn't finished. The story isn't finished. And the story has to be told. I believe we're the first to ever read it, too. and agree that we don't want to leave these atrocities buried forever, even if they were only stored in our own minds. January 12, 1991. We've taken a few days off above ground. The plan now is to go as deep as possible. We've gathered up a few weeks' worth of supplies and will descend again tomorrow. January 13th, 1991. Today, we hit 1,000 feet down. I can't believe it. We investigated more living chambers with various odds and ends and found a few more incredible tools. One of them looks like a pencil, but it literally scrapes through rock as easily as one of those knives would cut through dirt. This explains the incredible detail in some of the pictographs and creations we've encountered. We found more and more of the story as the day moved along. To sum it up from the beginning, my interpretation is that some sort of alien race made its way to Earth looking for a new start, or maybe just to expand through colonization. Humanoid for sure, but not entirely human as we know it here. They were miners of incomparable skill and ability, literally built to survive underground for long periods. At some point, humans found and enslaved them to mine diamonds, working them relentlessly until exhaustion or worse. Later in the story, it shows a small group of the miners. I've been referring to them as the miners, escaping captivity and digging this hole after the sun went down relentlessly every single night. At this point, I believe every word of the story we're seeing is depicted as we descend deeper and deeper into the earth around us. Today, I saw something incredible. I'm compelled to say if it's true, but I already believe that it is. Something I've been asking myself is, how were they able to see properly when doing the nighttime digging? I don't believe this story is more than a few hundred years old, so dependable portable light should have been possible. There were no lanterns depicted and not a torch in sight. Today, I got my explanation, and my only guess as to why it wasn't depicted until today is they simply didn't think it was a big deal. A group was standing around the hole, appearing ready to enter for the night, but the first in line stood with his arms wide open, leaning back dramatically. In the next picture, he had begun to emit light from his entire body. I followed the images drawn on the walls around me and saw him enter the hole with the others following behind. They literally generated their own light. Incredible. January 14th, 1991. After making camp last night in the closest living quarters, approximately 900 feet down, we set off this morning feeling surprisingly fresh and ready to explore. To say that this has been a magnificent adventure will be putting it mildly. We've literally found proof of aliens, attempted genocide, and a lost civilization, all in one big hole in the ground. Today's portion of the story took quite the turn. As we continued to descend deeper and deeper, the pictographs began to change. As impossible as it sounds considering they were stick figures, the body language of the miners clearly changed from misery and desperation to anger and boldness. The pictures went from the occasional ring around the hole to a non-stop scene that continued to circle the hole, twisting its way down, deeper and deeper to what I knew would be an end sooner than later. The miners began to stir, speaking in groups when their captors weren't looking, shouting back in defiance when provoked and tugging at their chains with a renewed vigor. The miners digging this hole were dancing before going down, all of them radiating light, so bright the pictures depicted a dark valley illuminated by optimism. It was clear their plan was almost complete. I was growing excited, like reading a fascinating novel, dying to reach a satisfying ending as Vlad relentlessly pushed us deeper and deeper and deeper into the unknown. At 2,000 feet, we stopped for the night. The climax to the story would have to wait. January 15th, 1991. We left the living quarters we found at about 1,800 feet and descended quickly past some of yesterday's findings, before quickly picking up where we left off at the 2,000 feet mark. The story disappeared for about 100 feet or so before picking back up with a nighttime scene. The diggers snuck back into the mine site, killing the guards as they made their way to the caves where the rest of the miners were sleeping. Gently stirred awake by the diggers, everyone gradually became aware of their presence. Most of the miners were still chained together, and the diggers set forth breaking the chains with their special tools. It appeared they didn't damage iron as easily as rock, but the chains did eventually break. The miners began to quietly exit the caves. Dozens of their captors slept nearby in bunkhouses, completely unaware of what was going on. The last of the miners was freed, and the picture showed everyone congregating just outside the cave entrance, only steps from their sleeping captors. The group had turned away to leave, but a small child lingered behind. There was defiance drawn on its simple face. Slowly but surely, the child began to glow. The group noticed, stopped, and an adult moved toward the child to retrieve it. It refused to move, though, and the glow became brighter and brighter. Another child left the group and joined in, then another and another. Soon, the adults began to fall in line until everyone shined as bright as the sun. The captors came flying out of the bunkhouses and were immediately blinded by the focused beam of light. Having only just exited the cave, pickaxes still in hand and preparing to flee with the rescued miners, the diggers saw the captors blinded and vulnerable and seized their opportunity. Axes flew wildly as the diggers advanced and overwhelmed the blinded and paralyzed captors, slaughtering them mercilessly. Body parts were scattered about, heads rolled across the ground, and blood was strewn in perfect arcs from the tips of the daggers' tools as they savagely obliterated each and every man and woman responsible for their enslavement. As the pictures continued, night turned to day, casting a different kind of light on the horrific scene at the mine encampment. Every earthborn human was dead, piled into heaps of limbs and guts. Evildoers and enslavers turned to carrion for the wolves and buzzards that had ascended upon the remnants of the melee. Vlad and I were overwhelmed by the story before us. Tears both filled both our eyes as we sat in yet another living quarters carved out just over 2,500 feet down. "They didn't, Jack," he said, with a slight grin in front of his thick accent. "They survived." The last string of pictures showed everyone marching to the hole, exhausted, with some helping others walk. Large iron cuffs made into broken links of chain still adorned most of their ankles in the group as they walked for what appeared to be the better part of a week to get to the very hole I was standing in. Some didn't make it, and instead were buried along the path. Most of those that did survive the march appear to be on death's door as they slowly entered the hole. 2 men, 2 women, and 3 children, who were still above ground, flipped over the giant iron lid, buried it under the enormous amount of dirt Vlad had uncovered over 2 weeks ago, and limped off into the forest. That's where the story ended. January 20th, 1991. It's been 5 days since my last update. I'm not sure what exactly to make of all this, but here's the rest of the story. Vlad and I kept going after the pictographs ended. The pictures gave way to writing, and I have no clue what it said. Vlad was studying it carefully, sometimes scratching his head or stroking his beard in thought, but also nodding fairly often. It almost looked as if he understood at least some of what he was seeing. I know now that he was in fact understanding it. At what I estimate was 3,200 feet into solid rock in the middle of frozen tundra in a land far, far from any reasonably sized civilization, we hit bottom. The tunnel ended in a chamber about 40 by 40 feet, filled with more tools, sculptures, wooden crafts, tables, chairs, and other such things. Clearly they had spent some time living here. At one end of the room was a door about 5 feet high, with one word written in the foreign script. I stared at it, confused just as much as before. Vlad was crying. I looked over at him, feeling compelled to cry as well, but having no idea why. By that time, I suspected he could read some of what we'd seen. "Vlad, what does it say?" Barely choking out the words, he replied, "Says home." Before I could speak again, Vlad turned to face me. His eyes were glassy and distant. His mind was a million miles away now. "Jack, it is time for me to go. It is time for me to leave you. It is time for me to go home. I believe these are my people. Look at them and look at me. We are the same, and I can read many of their words. Why can I read their words? I was floored. I don't know how I hadn't seen it already. The height, the hands and feet, the absurd comfort underground. Was he a descendant of those few who had walked away? Was he called to the hole while it was buried and he was sleeping in our drilling site bunkhouse? Or was he called to this place long before that? A message while living underground for so many years in places all over the world. My head was about to explode. I knew he was right, though. There was no question in my mind at that point. He was one of them, or at least a part of him was. Vlad reached for my hand. A firm shake quickly transitioned into a hug from a true friend. My friend, I'm leaving you now. Go back to the surface, push the lid back in place, and cover it with soil again. I will not be coming back. I nodded, with tears in my eyes. Vlad removed his helmet and headlamp, slipped out his backpack, and let it drop to the floor with a thud. He opened the door, sending a cold blast of air into the already chilly chamber, and took 2 steps into the pitch black. Putting his arms to his sides, he began to gently vibrate from head to toe. Looking back at me with a surprised grin on his face, he began to emit light from every pore in his skin. Vlad walked into the chamber. Shielding my eyes as I closed the door behind him, I watched his light transform the dark into nothing but a memory. I sat for a few minutes, still not quite believing what I just experienced. After finally returning my aching body to an upright position, I made my way to the base of the hole to engage the platform and begin the long ascent. I put one foot in place, then stopped. Stepping off again, I opened my pack and produced the incredible rock writing pencil. I'm no artist, but I can certainly draw a stick figure. I set to work for the next few hours, making a pictograph of my own in one solid band 120 feet long depicting the journey Vlad and I had been on. Our portion of this story needed to be told, because it truly was the final chapter. The story did not end until Vlad returned. I presume he was the last of his people living above ground. Hell, I don't even know if his people are still living below ground either. I mean, it sounds impossible, right? It took me close to 2 days to make the ascent back to the drill site. Between regular climbing and cranking the handle on Vlad's contraption, my hands ached terribly and drastically slowed my progress. After finally making it back out of the hole, I left it uncovered for a few days while I recuperated, just in case Vlad changed his mind. I knew he wouldn't, though. Finally, I flipped the lid over with a backhoe and returned the dirt that had encased it for hundreds of years. When the time comes, I'll tell a company we work for that Vlad walked off into the woods again. I certainly won't be talking to them anytime soon, though. If you found my journal, then you've apparently put a hole in the wall. Or maybe they're tearing the drill site down. Who knows? This is your story now, though, and what you do from here on out is obviously entirely up to you. But please remember and consider those who have come before you and those who will follow, both above ground and below it. I trust that you will make the right decision